evening. I am calling our meeting on January 18th to order. Mr. Treasurer, please call the roll.
President Adair.
Present.
Ms. Beckerly.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Cole.
I am here.
Dr. Pierce.
Present.
Vice President Reyes.
Here.
And Ms. Vera.
Present.
You have a quorum, Madam President.
Thank you so much. Will you all please stand and join me in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, board members, on our agenda tonight, we will start with public comment on agenda items. We have one speaker. We're expecting no executive report from the superintendent. We have a report from both our internal auditor and treasurer. We have 2 items on board matters. We have our consent agenda, and then we have one speaker to talk to us on a non-agenda item. There will be no executive session, and we will adjourn.
A motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Hearing that, and hearing no objections, the agenda will be adopted. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into public comment. So for public comment, you have 3 minutes to address the board, and it is comment. And our first speaker tonight is President John Coniglio, here to talk about item 18.1, personnel. Action requested, hire more personnel, specifically substitute teachers. President Coniglio.
Hello, President Adair, members of the board. As President of the Columbus Education Association, I'd like to address the current staffing crisis. Specifically, also want to talk about the lack of substitutes. And I was also looking at how many folks that you have on are going to be hiring, and it's not a lot. So as a direct result of COVID-19 surge, we are experiencing a staffing crisis. Just last week, a district consultant went on national TV and talked about ensuring quality in-person learning environment. The superintendent wrote in her weekly message about minor disruptions. Today, the superintendent stood with the mayor and business community and told the press teachers are getting everything they need. Not reality. While it's clear that the business and political interests, not science and data, are driving decisions about in-person learning amidst our record cases and hospitalizations, we believe in data and have some to share with you. In fact, CEA's preliminary data indicates as of January 4th, our fill rate for subs when a teacher is absent is about 28%. Which means, for example, is that since the beginning of school year through December, no fewer than 2,166 elementary school classrooms have been split because there are no substitutes available. Our teachers do everything in their power to keep students learning. Our students in combined classes of 35 or 40, or worse yet, in an auditorium watching a movie due to a lack of subs, are not getting the education they deserve. As a school board, you have been missing in action. Our students need your voice more than ever. You are vested with the power to make the hard decisions that must be made. Our union has proposed a 2-week remote learning pause to address this crisis and get through the worst of the current surge, as is being done in Cleveland and Cincinnati. We stand ready to work with you on solutions, especially around staffing, but so far we're being met with denial. So tonight, I'm asking you not just to believe the nearly 3,000 teachers who signed our open letter, not to just believe our statistics, but to come and see for yourself. I have hundreds of invitations from teachers to you for each member of the board, from CE members to come and visit their classrooms or building and see for yourselves what is happening. On behalf of the teachers in your district, please get off the sidelines and work with us to ensure the safe and quality schools our students deserve. We need more subs. We need staffing. So I have a copy of this. If you would all like one, I can have Phil deliver them for you. And we invite you out into our buildings, see what's going on, and maybe we can, if we address some of the issues, that we would have more subs working.
Just have a clarifying
Question.
No, we're not doing questions. Thank you so much, President Caniglio. All right, let's go ahead, and we don't have a report from the superintendent, but we will hear from you a little bit later in board matters. So we're gonna go ahead and go to item 5, which is the internal auditor. Good evening, Auditor
evening.
Smith.
Good evening. President Adair, Vice President Reyes, and members of the board. At our fall Audit and Accountability Committee meeting, we did a presentation which basically went over the roles and responsibilities that everyone in the district has in regards to risk management and internal controls. And that responsibility could be in the implementation, it could also be in the monitoring, or it could be in the reporting. And that presentation was received well, and Chair Beckerly asked that we do a same or similar presentation to the board. So that is what I have for you tonight. That presentation will be led by Kevin Santkowski, Executive Director of Specialty Audits with the Office of Internal Audit. And at the end of the presentation, I will go over the OIA's work plan and the cycle that we follow in our office to give you a better glimpse into what it is that we do. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kevin Santkowski, who I kind of see up on the screen, but not quite.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and see you.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, President Adair, Vice President Reyes, members of the Board of Education. It's my pleasure to be here this evening to give you a presentation that was provided to our Audit and Accountability group a little while back that talks about specifically the things that Carolyn was mentioning. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you. My apologies for that. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the 3 lines model. Let me do this a little bit differently. We're going to talk about the 3 lines model and OIA's role within that model. We're going to talk a little bit about, let me, from the beginning. Bear with me just a second.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right, what we're going to cover is the 3 lines model and OIA's role within that model. Some of you may be familiar with it. My guess is that perhaps many of you are not. So some of the objectives that we have tonight are to provide a high-level understanding of exactly what that 3 model is and its applicability to organizational risk management activities. Then we'll also talk a little bit about what OIA's role is, role and responsibilities within that 3 lines model is, and how we meet those responsibilities through our activities. And as Carolyn mentioned, she'll cover our last bullet point, and that's understanding the OIA activity cycle for the independent assurance and consulting services that we do provide. So let's go ahead and get started. What exactly is the 3 lines model? Well, it's a principles-based model that was developed by the Institute of Internal Auditors. And what it does is it identifies a structure that is intended to assist an organization in achieving its objectives and to help facilitate strong governance and risk management practices. And the model is optimized when everybody has a clear understanding of what those roles are. And what those responsibilities of each of the roles are in the model. And so we're going to share the model with you and that relationship and show you those things just so you have that understanding of kind of the model that we're working in OIA, and kind of hopefully offer this as a model for structuring the risk management activities for the district. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is the model in the picture form. You have the governing body, then you have management and internal audit. And then on the outside of our organization, we do also have external assurance providers. We're going to walk through each of the areas of the model here And you'll see that from the model, you have arrows that are going up and down and side to side. Essentially, the governing body is providing information, expectation, resources, delegation of authority down to management as well as internal audit. And in return, they get reports, they get information, they get assurances from internal audit, assurance from management as far as the activities that are taking place. And we'll walk through each of the responsibilities here for each of these areas and which one satisfies each of the three roles or each of the three lines. Okay, so as the governing body, responsibilities of the governing body are to be accountable for oversight and provide an accountable oversight for the organization, and that involves setting the risk appetite, devising internal control or establishing the need for internal control and establishing the need for compliance. Responsibility of the governing body is also to transparently communicate activities and communicate progress towards achieving organizational objectives. Another one is to provide a culture of integrity, ethical behavior, and accountability. Also responsible for establishing the structure of process for governance. You're also responsible for delegating the responsibility and provide resources down to management and internal audit. And then establishing and overseeing an independent, objective, and competent internal audit function. Those are all the responsibilities of the governing body. Now you'll notice that they don't necessarily fulfill one of the three lines roles, but they do play a part in dictating or in directing the activities of each of the three lines. So when we get into management in our model, management actually holds two lines in the model. They hold the first line, which are your frontline managers and your frontline supervisors that are responsible for the provision of products and services to clients, as well as responsible for managing risk. They're considered the risk owners. So they lead and they direct actions and resources to achieve objectives. They're the ones who direct those resources, direct those actions towards achieving the objectives that are set out by the board. They're also responsible for maintaining a dialogue with the Board of Education, and then they report back on the performance and the outcomes in the context of those objectives and the risks that have been identified for the organization. They also establish and maintain structures and processes for managing the operations and for managing risks, and those include developing and designing and implementing the specific internal controls that are put in place in order to manage the risks. And then they're also responsible for ensuring compliance with expectations, and that compliance may be in the area of legal compliance, regulatory compliance, or any ethical compliance that's set forth by the board. Then you move into the second line, which is more of a support and monitoring role. You'll notice that it still is a function of management, however. This is our groups of people that are experts in the areas in which they serve or the functions that they support, but they provide a support and a monitoring role. They are complementary expertise, support, and monitoring to the first line risk management activities. So you have the first line folks that are on the front line. This is kind of the next line back where they're providing that support and that expertise in whatever function that they are supporting. It gives the first line folks a resource to contact and a resource to work with in carrying out their activities. Another responsibility is that they develop and implement continuous improvement of risk management practices at all levels. And then they'll also provide analysis and reports on the adequacy and the effectiveness of risk management, and again, including internal control. This last bullet point is really speaking towards periodic testing or periodic evaluation of the adequacy and the effectiveness of the function in and of itself. And you're going to see that it's a little different from what the Office of Internal Audit does and the role that we do, because you might be asking yourself, once I show you internal audit, you're going to ask yourself, well, I thought that's what our internal audit folks do. This second line is really intended to be a more readily available and continuous monitoring aspect of a particular function, whereas opposed to the Office of Internal Audit, we support, or we provide in a third line, we provide the independent assurance and objective assurance as to the effectiveness of internal control. And so where we go and we test it periodically, the idea of the second line is really that they are there more readily available and more frequently performing an evaluation of the adequacy. So some of the responsibilities of internal audit as the independent assurance provider is we maintain accountability to the Board of Education and independence from management's responsibilities. We also provide independent and objective assurance and advice to management and the Board of Education. This is really what we spend a large majority or the biggest majority of our work on, is providing that independent and objective assurance and advice. We're also here to support the achievement of objectives and promote and facilitate continuous improvement. And then we implement independence and objectivity safeguards. And then we also are responsible for reporting any impairments that we might have to the Board of Education. You know, we are that independent assurance provider, and should anything impair our independence, we clearly need to make sure that we communicate that to the Board of Education so that they're aware of that when they take the advice or when they take the reports that we provide. Then you have your external insurance providers, where they are not necessarily one of the three lines, but we do gain additional assurance from external providers. They are those that might be in addition to satisfy legislative and regulatory requirements that protect stakeholder interests. If you think of, for instance, the Ohio Auditor of State and the financial audit that is done, that's an example of an external assurance provider. And then we also have they also satisfy management and the Board of Education's request to complement the internal assurance sources. If you think of some of the recent management reviews that were done related to HR or to transportation or the curriculum audit, those are all examples of additional external assurance providers, and they complement the internal assurance sources that we have. So bringing it all back together, just another example or another demonstration of where everybody lands in the model, where we have the governing body, the management who houses the first and second lines, and then the internal audit assurance provider. And like I said, you can see where you have the lines that go up are the accountability and the reporting that internal audit and management does back to the Board of Education, and then the lines down, you know, represent the delegation or the direction of resources and oversight that's provided by the board over the three lines in place. And lastly, what I have to discuss here is just examples of how the Office of Internal Audit satisfies its role as that third line. You know, how do we meet our responsibilities as the third line in that model? Well, the first one being maintain accountability to the Board of Education and independence from management responsibilities. We do that through mostly through structure. You know, the organization is structured as such that our chief audit executive is a direct report of the Board of Education. That allows for a greater degree of accountability and independence from management responsibilities. We've established a separate audit and accountability committee. And also you'll note that the OIA holds no operational management positions. You know, once you step into the role of management, that has a tendency to impair the independence. And so our current structure is such that we maintain that by not having any management positions within the organization. We provide independent objective assurance and advice to management and the Board of Education. As I mentioned, that's the greatest service, or the majority of the services we provide are through those assurance and consulting services. That's our annual audit plan and any consulting services that we may provide, whether those are formal or informal consulting services. We support the achievement of objectives and promote facilities and facilitate continuous improvement. We do that through the recommendations that we put into our audit reports or into our consulting reports, or even our informal advisory services. We attend Board of Education committee meetings, you know, whether it's the board meeting, whether it's any of the committee meetings. We typically have someone there, offer assistance if needed, offer any insight we may be able to provide. We also do it through the participation of district initiatives. We've segmented our department so that our segment managers become very familiar with their lines of business and the folks that they support and conduct audits or consulting services for. That gives them a great opportunity to really get to know those folks' business and try to provide the best possible service. And then also just through informal advisory services. We love when folks call us just with questions, and we can provide assistance and provide help in any way we can, whether it's insight into control, insight into process, insight into compliance, whatever the question may be. We very much welcome those, and we love to have those calls made. And then finally, implement independence and objectivity safeguards and report impairments to the Board of Education. Fortunately, we haven't noted any impairments that required communication, but we do have a process in place should those impairments come to fruition, that we have a process to make those reports. But what the safeguards we put in is that we require an annual certification of independence, as well as within each individual engagement that's conducted, the assigned staff is required to, again, reassert their independence to the process. And then we also keep that in mind as we do resource assignments. Should someone have identified in either their annual or their project certification a potential independence or objectivity impairment, we reassign folks. And so we really take that seriously to make sure that we have that independent and objective team on our projects. So now I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn for her to go over the annual audit cycle for our independent assurance and advice services.
I'm sorry, for some reason Kevin can't hear. Kevin, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, he can hear you now. There were a few questions while you were going through the slides, so do you want us to do those first?
It's whatever you'd like.
We can do those now, and then I'll pick up afterwards.
These are kind of two separate topics, right?
Not really, but.
Oh, all right. Well, then we can get through the whole.
Oh, okay. So basically, what I wanted to go over, and let me bring it up on my slide, is our work plan cycle. You know, you've all heard me throughout the years come, and I kind of bring you in at the beginning where we reach out and set up interviews with some of you to find out, you know, okay, what kind of keeps you up at night and what do you think we should be working on? And then we come back towards the end and let you know, okay, this is what we have decided, you know, is our priorities based on all the conversations and the input that we have received from the various stakeholders. I just want to take you through the cycle globally today, and then as we're going through the steps, maybe just kind of refresh. Okay, now we're at this phase of the cycle. Now we're at this phase of the cycle. So hopefully you'll have a more holistic overview of how the cycle in my office works. Okay, so the big red thing is where we are right now. Every year we want to gather information on the risk assessments from the various departments. So this year we asked all of the departments to complete a really, you know, high-level, simple survey. And with that information, it'll help us generate the questions that we want to dig deeper into. And I don't have a little pointy thing, so just go around the circle. So the next thing we do is the risk assessment of the department functions. And that's where we dig deeper from those surveys that we received back this week. We'll analyze them, and some might require further conversations, and we'll have those conversations. The next step is we look to see if we internally have the resources to conduct the potential work, or should we consider doing some outsourcing. Typically, we outsource, you know, IT engagements. This year, because we do have an IT resource in our department, that will look a little bit different. I don't think he'll be able to do everything, but we might not have to outsource as much as we have in the past. So after we have done those 3 steps, the next thing we do is we draft our work plan. And the work plan, it truly is a draft. It kind of identifies what we think we should be doing based on those conversations. And then the next step is we take it to, this year is going to be cabinet, have those conversations with cabinet. Then we're going to take it to the Audit and Accountability Committee and have those conversations with them, and then get their recommendation, and then we bring it to the board for approval. And that's a step that you all have seen in the past, but you haven't been as integral to the other parts in between. The next step is we execute the work plan. Periodically, I come here and give you overviews of the reports that have been presented to Audit and Accountability and what the status of those reports are. And then the final report, I skipped a step. The final step is the reports to the audit committee and then to the board. And then after it comes to you all, it gets published on our website. So we are very transparent in our process. It looks like a little bit, but this is a full year process. It starts about right now, and then we go all the way through August is when I come back to the board with wanting to get the approval of the work plan, and then we start to execute that work plan. And then we start back again, and the cycle just continues. So with that, we'll be happy to, Board President, we are done, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, we have Board Member Eckerly and then Board Member Cole.
Kevin, could you go back to the slide where we have all the 3 lines? Maybe the bringing it back together slide. All right, so I feel a little badly because I should have teed this up before they even got started, because I asked for this report to be shared with us because the 3 lines, and I guess at some point it was called the 3 lines of defense, and now they just call it the 3 lines model. But it crystallized for me when they presented this to us, because in that management block there, you've got the first line is provision of products, services to clients managing the risk. Second line is an expertise, support, monitoring, and challenging on risk-related matters. And then internal audit comes in sort of after management has done their own systematic risk assessment. And so it's a very intentional second step in the process within the various departments where they're managing their own risk. And it would be a shift in, I think, how we function now that I thought would be really worth surfacing and trying to get management to think about how to conduct things differently, so that the role of internal audit then would be much more free to do sort of this sort of periodic cycle audit that we've been talking about all along, that is really their function, rather than sort of their audit plan being driven by risks as they come up. And so, and I thought it was it crystallized for me sort of where we might be able to structure the operations within each department differently, such that they're sort of monitoring and reporting on their own risks and kind of keeping track of it, independent of what the audit department, the Office of Internal Audit is doing. And so that was my reason to want to bring it to the board, so that we could sort of think about it, noodle on it. It's a different way of approaching risk, really, and trying to manage for risk. And, you know, I'd be curious to hear at some point, maybe not tonight, but maybe after Dr. Dixon and her team have had a chance to think about it, to see if it might be a way for us to roll a little bit differently and more efficiently, instead of it being, you know, it feels a little less reactionary even. So that was my whole reason for wanting to bring this up as a model of maybe thinking about how to structure the organization and operations within it.
Yeah, and if I could just add, a lot of times, ideally, if we're serving in that second line function, you know, it's kind of a little bit too late, because you're going to want those subject matter experts in the department, you know, like in the Department of Transportation or the Department of Food Service or whatever department. You're going to want them, you know, to actually be managing and owning that, you know, versus, you know, my department. So this is a model that a lot of commercial organizations kind of take and tweak to fit to fit for their organization. This might not fit us, but it is definitely something to consider, how we can tweak it and make something like this work. And I know we kind of talked about enterprise risk management, and I've talked to the superintendent and the treasurer and some of our informal conversations. So I know there's some movement, you know, that may be happening on that. But after the presentation to audit and accountability, we thought it was a good idea to circle back and bring it to the board.
One more thing, and then I'll be quiet because I know I already asked my question. But the problem now is, I think that the role of second line, that in this model that is within the second line of defense, right? Risk management or risk mitigation. That's in this model is within management. Is sort of being covered a little bit by internal audit. That line's blurred. And I think sometimes that it leads to two things. One, sometimes it leads to tension because, you know, what really should be a management function the Office of Internal Audit is kind of in there sort of, you know, monitoring that risk. And then the other thing is it creates the internal audit plan, which is to some extent getting back to how do you sleep at night. You know, in a perfect world, the Office of Internal Audit is just kind of chugging along doing regular cycle audits, not based on emergent problems necessarily, but more based on their job is to keep advising the board that yes, on a regular course of our 3-year cycle or whatever it is, we've kind of looked at every nook and cranny in the building, in the organization rather, and we didn't see a lot of risks. You know, it's going along according to plan, and that's the function. And if they can't ever get there because they're sort of responding to emergent things, because they're really sort of doing that second line role a little bit, we don't get that benefit from the Office of Internal Audit. So that's where I'm coming from with this.
Thank you. Board Member Cole, the Board Member Brown.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam Auditor, for this presentation. I think it's a good step in the direction of not only clarifying your role, but also clarifying our guidance in accordance to your role. This question that you've alluded to, I mean, which is first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation. I love to see us being that guiding factor in some essence about what those issues are that you're going to work on to provide audit. I have a question about timeline. So you mentioned beginning the process in August. Is there a specific timeline in which you're working? Is that a year? Is that 9 months? How much is it variable dependent? For example, is it dependent on, as you stated earlier, the number of people who are available that might impact that timeline? Is this a flexible timeline? Can you give us an idea?
Are you talking about like the jobs that we do or the?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, the jobs are definitely flexible. I was just talking to Chair Beckerly, you know, today, and the situation that we were facing when we did our work plan, you know, Delta was out there, but it wasn't as prevalent, you know, as it became, and there was this new one was just not even on our radar. So we look at the facts and the circumstances that we are dealing with currently, and we look to see, okay, does this work plan that we came up with in August, is it still appropriate in January? And if the question is no, then we go back and we'll come back to the audit committee and let them know why we want to make some changes to that work plan, and we'll make those changes. And we have done that before. And then I believe the final step is, as I'm reporting, you know, to the board, you know, I informed the board that the audit committee agreed with these additions or these deletions to the work plan for this reason. So there is flexibility in our work.
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, I love to see how we, just on a job for job, ticket for ticket basis, whatever the language is you use, what that timeline looks like effectively. I'd just like to be able to see that and get an idea of that. And at those touch points, it seems like you give a report at the close, but is there opportunity for touch point of board feedback, so to speak, outside of just the committee, even board feedback or question opportunity in an interim kind of space within your cycle diagram?
I would love to do that if it won't bore you guys to death. I love talking about internal audit.
Appreciate that. And then my last question is how are you looking then at internal audit as your entity, your independent entity, in building capacity in that space? So you've done great work in the past around IT audit. You've got, particular expertise even in the committee to that effect, right? But when we're looking at other aspects of our operations, whether it is transportation, whether it is, certain aspects of our academic side that help us stay true as an organization to say portrait of a graduate, right? Where is that capacity, ability to work in that kind of space as well? You've alluded over the past and many years past the idea that, about what is it called? Grant compliance, for example. So there are any number of areas that may even impact our academic side. Where are you looking to, or are you looking to build capacity in those spaces as well to help ensure that there's effectiveness organizationally there?
Right now, the biggest thing that we did was I was able to bring on a IT auditor who I believe is going to be a tremendous asset to our department and also to the organization. He's already making those connections with the people over in IT. The other areas right now, the segment managers try to go to as much training and try to get to know those segments better themselves before we actually come and ask for additional resources. Like right now I have one person, it sounds like a small, like one is not enough, but Terry is assigned to academics and she is a go-getter. Whatever it takes for her to be up to date on what's going on so she can support, that segment, she's doing it. And then we'll sit back and evaluate, okay, is one person enough, or should we look at some other types of, not always immediately jump to hiring. There might be some type of co-sourcing or some type of, I could reach out to Dr. Dixon, hey, can somebody spend a little bit of time with us explaining this to us so we can audit it and be better at it? So I'm always looking at that. Do we have the right resources to do our job? And if I feel that we don't, I will definitely let the committee know and then bring a recommendation to the board as far as, what I think needs to happen in order to do that.
And then my last question is with regards to the identification of effectiveness. And I think that's much more of a collaborative space where you are providing, of course, a report that was a year prior audit on where operations were during that time. But obviously, at some point, you gave some sort of maybe corrective action recommendation to the administration on either side of the table, where many times I've seen them say that, yes, we've addressed this, we've addressed that. It fell within your green, yellow, red category of things. Are you still using that model, that paradigm? And is there still opportunity to continue to show collaborative progress, as a part of your audit, to actually show that we have taken the necessary steps to improve in any given space? I love the idea of how we make, a very working, there's contraction and expansion, there's creative tension there, but there has been over the years a working kind of space where you identify something. I've seen Stan do it, I've seen other superintendents do it, where they're saying, yes, this is where we've done this, this, and this here to take corrective action, to remediate, what have you. Am I making sense?
Yes, and that is something that we report on every audit committee, and it kind of gets buried in our dashboard report, but I can definitely call that out because you will see some movement on some of the items that we have noted in the past, and we'll be able to come back and say, okay, as of this date, these issues have been addressed, and what you'll hear me say is we're closing these issues because we've gone out, we've done some testing, and we're satisfied that the issue is no longer relevant or it's been corrected. So you will see that when we start having audit committee meetings.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Board Member Brown.
Thank you. I think that this was helpful in some ways. But let me ask, I guess, are there examples that you can provide? And they, none of this has to be answered here and now. But are there examples of schools and education organizations that are using this? To what extent is this basically in the financial industry or in other big business? But are there schools and educational organizations using it? And if so, what's what are their thoughts after using it for a few years, to be able to tell? Secondly, and this is, well, let me get to that one. Who is it? I guess this was developed by the Institute, and I don't know what how that's said, but regardless, who's advocating for this in the field of internal audit, and who criticizes it? And and then finally, by far the most important of my questions is, and I'll preface this by saying, I know that everything we do, there's not a direct and tangible way that can be tied to benefiting our kids. But with this, I have that same question, even if it's not direct, even if it's not tangible. How do you see the change to this kind of model benefiting our students?
Okay, for your first question, well, thank you. First of all, let me get back to protocol. Board Member Adair to Board Member Brown. I'm like President Adair to Board Member Brown. For your first question, I will have to, when you say educational, do you want it limited to school districts, or could it be universities, or?
Well, I prefer K-12 school districts, public schools, but to the extent that those other models, those other organizations will provide some insight, that's fine too.
Okay.
Especially if that's all there is.
Okay. And then as far as who developed it, we follow the Institute of Internal Audit as far as our standards and our Office of Internal Audit, our policies, and are not our policies, but our procedures and our standards. So the Institute of Internal Audits has been really heavily supporting a model that clearly identifies everyone's role in governance, risk, and compliance. So they came up with this model. They've tweaked it over the years. And it's just, for me, it clearly defines how everybody has a role. It clearly defines that, your first line, front line workers have a role. It's not all on management. It's not all on internal audit. It's not all on the board. Everybody has a role in risk management, even just coming down from the fact that people instructing students to wear their mask. Everybody has a role in the risk management of this organization. So that's what the model was really driving at and really trying to emphasize, and really trying to give those clear lines. Internal audit really should not own risk management. We're not the subject matter experts in these areas. We can definitely report back to the board. We went out and we did testing, and there are some concerns in this area. This one area is really, really following rules and regulations, and they're in compliance. This one is needs some guidance here, but it really is that second line or the managers to really manage that. I mean, I can't, it would not be benefit for me to go in and try to tell food service or try to tell transportation, what their risks are and how they should mitigate those risks. I can definitely come back and say, okay, we looked at your plan and it could be tightened up here, and come back to the board and say, oh yes, they have identified those risks and they have a plan to address it and to mitigate it. Your third question, I'm sorry.
Well, I was asking both who advocates for using this plan and then asking who's criticizing it or what criticisms are there.
That I would have to get back to you. As far as advocating, most of the organizations that, you know, I'm familiar with, those who sit on our audit committee, you know, they're very familiar, you know, with this type of model. I would have to do some research to see who is critical of the model.
And the final question that I had was about the benefit to kids. And, you know, explaining that I understand it's not always direct, it's not always tangible, but is there something that you're able to point to why this model can help us better educate our children?
As far as better educating, I think any model or any plan that emphasizes having strong controls over your resources is going to be beneficial to our stakeholders, to our students, because the resources are being efficiently distributed to where it needs to go versus possibly squandered or, you know, wasted. And this model, or any model that really emphasizes a strong internal control structure, is going to be beneficial to our stakeholders and to our students.
That's helpful, that's fair. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Pierce.
Thank you so much, President Adair, Internal Auditor Smith. I appreciate the presentation. I think for me, outside of the model, right, because there's all kinds of models you can use to determine success and outcomes and outputs and inputs and all those lovely things and concepts. As a district, we are adopting goals and guardrails. We have adopted the portrait of a graduate. And so as I look at this model and I think about your role as that third line, the question for me is, what is your timeline to align and come alongside those goals, guardrails, and a portrait of the graduate? So specifically, I think tonight's meeting gives a great example when we look at item 12.2. the purchasing of computers to ensure that our students have the proper resource, the hardware, to be able to achieve the portrait of a graduate seal. In my mind, while the model impacts that, what's more important is that your department and your unit is working collaboratively, hand in hand, in such a way that when that risk is about to happen and say, hey, if we don't purchase 50 more of these computers, we're not going to hit the percentage point that we're predicting to hit, right? I guess that's what I'm expecting to see. And so for me, I'm more concerned about when can we expect to see your area really begin to work in tandem with the goals, the guardrails, the portrait of a graduate, and our superintendent.
You will see that alignment, at least in my vision, you will see that alignment as we work on our work plan, as we go through and as we're going through and doing the interviews and talking to the different leaders, and they are describing how they're going to be able to support the goals and guardrails. You know, we'll go back and we'll look at our work plan and say, you know what, this sounds good, but I don't know if they have the personnel to actually do that, you know. So we might do an audit on the human resources that are needed to do something. Or, for the example that you just gave, we might ask the question, how do we know, how did they come up with 50? Or how did they come up with this number? Is the information that they're basing this decision on accurate? So it might be beneficial to do a data integrity audit. And then I can go back to the superintendent and say, I know they said this, but, when we did our review of the data integrity, what's feeding that information might not be quite, what we think it is. So hopefully, by aligning our work plan to those golden guardrails, you will also see that alignment. I mean, we've been giving this a lot of thought as far as how what we do is going to be able to support the goals and guardrails of the district.
I appreciated that. I got excited. You didn't see my smile underneath my mask because your response led to another question that I was thinking about. Initially, when you started your presentation, you said there's a survey that you send out, correct? Mm-hmm. So is that survey being revised and updated to include and incorporate the language from the goals and guardrails, the particular resources that are going to become important under the goals and guardrails? So again, my mind is spinning because I'm thinking one of those questions should definitely be around equity. So when we're auditing resources, the question might become more of, are we ensuring that this resource is distributed equitably across the district? When we're looking at the percentages and the points, are they thinking about, in a 2-year, 3-year span, can this projection realistically be hit? So are we tailoring the questions on the survey to align with the work that we're doing with the goals guardrails, or are we simply going to continue to use the same survey that we're using?
We've already sent out the survey, but we can definitely, as we hit that, it's not up there, as we hit that next step, we will definitely make sure that the language that we are using is in alignment with the goals and the guardrails. I mean, I've heard that repeatedly from this board, and we have taken that to heart.
Awesome. And if you could share that survey with us, that would be excellent. Thank you. Those were all my questions.
But just as a point of clarity, the survey is about risk assessment.
Correct.
So it's really, where do you see the risk in all your respective organizations? And so the risk then, to your point, and this is what we've been talking about, the risk to not achieving the goals and the guardrails.
That's why the survey has to align with the goals and the guardrails and the language. Yes.
Right. So the survey that we've already sent out and received is not that specific, but like I said, we can definitely adjust it. And as we're going through this process, keep the goals and the guardrails in front of us.
Yes. It's a team effort.
Actually, Dr. Pierce took my question. That was going to be my question too, about alignment to our work. And so I want to lean into that and just, you know how important that is. I also appreciate this model because it does, as you explained, risk is everyone's responsibility. The day-to-day things you do in your job, to the managers, to all the way up to us. So, so I do like this model, and it kind of is where we were leaning in for you to kind of push to, I think. So, so I'm glad to see that. So thank you for that. Thank you for this report. You have another thing to say, Board Member Beckerly?
Just that this is the first part discussion. I mean, really, this model requires a shift within management.
Yes.
So this is really, it's not like we're saying we're going to adopt this model and go off into the sunset together. We're starting the conversation about how to think about embracing this. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yes, and I want to go ahead and let the superintendent and treasurer, if they like to chime in here. I know that in the treasurer's office, you've actually been working on, I think, in this would be the first and second lines in this model.
The work that we've conducted hasn't been with that model in mind.
But you're doing it anyway.
In the vein of just risk management and enterprise risk management in general. So I've not digested that.
Right.
Neither have you. So I can't speak to the impact, change in approach, if it is in fact a change in approach. I don't know. I can't, like I said, I haven't digested it. I keep going back to what we're doing, and that is focusing on not only risk identification, but prioritization. We cannot do all things for all people. We can't. And we cannot address all of the risks. We can't mitigate them all. So we have to prioritize that as we do that through learning about the process of risk identification. How do we quantify risk in terms of its inherent risk, which is a combination of likelihood and impact, and then we have to then look internally to see what have we already done to mitigate, and where do we need to spend our time and focus on, and that does change. 3 weeks ago, I thought I had a pretty good model for assessing operating levy needs. Last week, the state released their first report. We found out that something's up. So I don't know if things have changed, if it's not written down correctly, and not real sure, but that created uncertainty. So we have to stop, drop, and roll kind of a thing, because that is a critical factor. That is a high risk, high impact kind of an item. So we stop and we focus in on that. I can't speak to all of this, but I can tell you that we do look at risk, and we did our assessment, and it does guide our work, but those things can pop up and change our direction. Understand too that we're under audit from multiple venues, if you will, multiple sources of audit. State Auditor's Office. We've got state and federal programs are audited by ODE, the federal government, and also internal audit. So there is an ongoing audit process within the district, and fortunately or unfortunately, my office tends to be a target-rich environment. So there's a lot going on, which is all the more important to focus that effort on those things that will have an impact on the district outcomes. And I think Carolyn was correct. This is about, for lack of better terms, protection of district resources. And it's protection from loss of some sort. You've begun to delve into questions of Dr. Pierce, you mentioned equitable allocation. That's a big project of ours, and we're learning about what that means. Please don't come audit us yet. We're not ready for that. But part of it is to focus our efforts on things, and then at some point, sure, take a look to see if that actually worked, because we will have metrics and things like that. Like I always said, I could talk for an hour on something too if I know something about it, so I'll stop.
And thank you. I guess when I was asking, you answered it appropriately, but I didn't mean to make you feel like you had to comment on her model. I know it might be the first time you're hearing and digesting, but I just knew that you were working on things internally and kind of thinking. And so in my mind, what you're already doing seems to, as I'm learning more about the model as well, already align. And I think same with the superintendent's office.
Yeah, I think part of the concern is, it's almost like which comes first. Do we continue identifying within our own individual departments potential risk, or do we really change the narrative and align it to the board goals and guardrails? Because when you do that, then some other things may not seem to be a bigger risk than others. And I think the survey, as Carolyn stated, that we have out really currently is not aligned to that, because we are really identifying things kind of as we've done in the past. But I really like how she's agreed that we need to reshape that and really align it to the board goals and guardrails. So I think people see more purpose behind it, right? And then I think we will be a better district because people understand that it's not something that we do because when auditors come, we want to make sure we check all our boxes, but there's some intentionality, right? The reason we're doing this is for this. And so I like the way the conversation is leading us to say that we have to have some intentionality. And I know when the three of us meet and we talk about it and just kind of lay the plan out, that's going to be helpful for us. Because right now we're looking at, okay, how do we, during a pandemic, keep kids, in school and get the resources that we need right now, and not that those things that we identify in the audit are not important, but, we're thinking like, okay, transportation, all those other things that are kind of coming to the forefront right now, right in front of us. But I agree with Dr. Pierce and others, just align this, have that intentionality to our board goals and guardrails. So when we come back and we're having those monitoring conversations, we can speak to the audits and other things that we found, and it all blends together in the same conversation. So, and it leads to student outcomes in all of our, in the work that all three of us are doing.
Thank you for that conversation. More to come on that. Thank you for that work, Auditor Smith and team.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move into the treasurer's report. Over to you.
Thank you, President Adair and board members. I don't think I'll be that long tonight, so I appreciate the segue. Tonight we have the monthly financial report for December 2021, the 6th month of the fiscal year. During that month, revenues were about $4.4 million under plan, and expenditures were spot on, $789,000 over plan on just over $380 million of expenditures for the year. As I mentioned just a moment ago, the new state aid funding formula is now available in the state reports, and I'll just say that there are issues. There are issues in the law, what they intended and what they put in the law. There are some issues there that need to be corrected. There are some issues in how what was written in the law is actually converted into code and calculations and things like that. We have questions about how certain pieces of the data are being used, and so we are not alone in our questions, and this is just with any new funding formula and new system, just for lack of better terms, bugs that we need to get figured out and worked out in the system. So we're getting the reports, we're getting paid monthly state aid. I'm sure it's close, but it's not the exact number that we're expecting. So year-to-date revenues are about 2.7% below plan, and expenditures are less than 1% below plan at this point. So we're very much spot on. Looking at there we go. Looking at breakdown of revenues, again, state aid through December was $13 million below plan, and that was because the new formula wasn't into place. I believe we got about a $23 million net payment in the first payment this month, so we're going to really do a lot of catch up in January. So we'll see how that plays out. But it is right now the single largest contributor to that $10 million below plan variance. Other revenues, property taxes remain unchanged, although we are in a collection period, so we begin receiving advances this month, that is in January. Other local, $2 million above plan, and all other revenue sources are $1 million under. You can see here the breakdown of all those other revenue categories, property tax allocation, that's money that we get from the state. That's the rollback. That's no activity yet at this point, but that still remains pretty much spot on. Talked to the committee about, and to this board about making quarterly reports to the board instead of monthly, because we believe some of those variances will smooth themselves out and the conversation will be more meaningful on a quarter-to-quarter basis. This is the line chart that I've been using to do that, but just to give you a preliminary look at what I've begun to develop on a quarterly basis, this is how the total revenues of both quarter to date and year to date will look, and that I'll be discussing in a report to the board. And I will take those lines, in this particular case, total revenues, show you the quarter to date variance in terms of dollars, see how that has changed quarter to quarter, and then year to date variances, and you can see now 10 million under plan through the end of the second quarter. And I'll also share line item variances. Again, this is total revenues, line item variances in terms of percents, down 2% in the first quarter, down 5% in the second quarter. You have to keep in mind what happens first quarter versus third quarter. each quarter. First and third quarters, we have property tax coming in, so there's a large dollar amount. So the dollar variances can be larger with smaller percent variances. So this can be somewhat misleading, but just if you understand what the numerator and denominator are, you get a pretty good picture. I share that this is on total year-to-date revenues of about $367 million. So again, we're within 2% on a quarterly basis. Your report on a quarterly basis will be, as I envision it, in 3 sections. One at a very high level, total revenue, total expenditure level, with an executive summary of that, probably what you typically expect in a one-page executive summary. Then I'm going to go into the major categories of revenue and major categories of expense. There'll be 3 of them: property taxes, state monies, and all other in terms of revenue. And then on the expenditure side, it'll be personnel, non-operating or operating non-personnel, and then non-operating non-personnel. Those will be the 3 categories. Then the third section will be line by line based upon the 5-year forecast nomenclature. That I'll get into that with a lot of charts and graphs that you can look at. And so as a reader, you can choose how far you want to go into that report. I will be presenting to the board at the major category level, or at least that's what I'm anticipating. For December on the expenditure side, again, personnel was just about $973,000 over plan this month, taking that year-to-date variance to $8.5 million under plan. This is the second month in a row it's been slightly over plan, so we're whittling away at that and creeping up closer and closer to being on plan. Non-personnel now at this point is at $6.3 million above plan. Notice there's a bar missing on this graph. I've taken out charter schools. Not going to see that anymore. I'm not even using it as a placeholder. The all other expenditures are broken out in this way. It's a mixed bag of over and unders ranging from $4 million over to $3 million under. And just to give you an idea of there, nothing dramatic that I can see that would impact and make a change in the forecast. Keep in mind that these comparisons are to a plan that is based upon the November 5-year forecast. So in reality, what we're asking here is anything going on that would cause us to believe that there's a change in the 5-year forecast that will be coming up then in May? And really, sooner than that, the Finance Committee will be, we passed on talking about the operating levy planning this past meeting simply because of the state revenue issue and thinking, boy, if it's really dropped from where LSC estimates were, we might want to take a pause and real quick redo that model so that we can work on a little bit better piece of information. And then we're also still in the midst of updating this 5-year staffing plan, so we might want to work some of that into the almost daily, if not weekly, question is, what about the ESSER PILGs that we've employed? So over the next month or so, we should address that and have some idea about what's that number look like. Will they come on board? What should we placeholder in? What do we do with that? So we'll clean up those kind of preliminary decisions and come up with how we want to modify our plan as we prepare to look at a possible operating levy. Again, a quarterly look, my line chart. Expenditures did a better job of showing, I think, some variability than maybe perhaps revenues, but you can see we're running right on plan, so it's not terribly exciting quarter to quarter. But again, this is how to look on expenditures. This is the total expenditure line. You can see we were under in the first quarter, a little bit over in the second quarter, and now we're pretty much spot on year to date. The dollar amount variances, $12.2 million under for the first quarter, $10 million above plan for the second quarter. Again, driven a lot by personnel. That's on $381 million, just to give you that perspective. So $12 million and $10 million on $381 million year to date. And we're under plan by $2.2 million on $381 million. So things move around category to category, but from what's the impact on the 5-year forecast? Expenditures aren't raising an eyebrow at this point in time. These are the percentage variances, and you can see, as I mentioned earlier, 0.6 year to date under plan on overall expenditures. So that was it for the monthly financial report. The committee then heard 2 reports, both of them from the operations side. Alex Trevino was at the committee meeting. to give the committee an update on Operation Fix-It, our successes there, how that $125 million bond issue, plus some interest dollars, were spent in repairs and maintenance and construction projects around the district. And then we got into a more in-depth discussion about, a district our size, what do we really need in terms of a capital budget to maintain our facilities? This isn't those large redo an entire building, tear down a building, build a new building. That's the FMP process. This is the ongoing, we typically call it life cycle replacement, but it's vehicles, it's buses. We did the 80 million, but that's going to run out. All right, that doesn't last forever. So that buses, other types of equipment, HVAC repairs, roofing repairs. And Alex did, I think, a phenomenal job. If you didn't watch it, go back and watch his presentation on this. And it was sort of a shock and awe so that you get that scope of how large this district really is. Because it's, when you say, you need $45 to $50 million a year in a capital budget just to maintain your buildings, that's a big number. That's a hard pill to swallow. But when you see it and you get that picture, I think he did a fantastic job of explaining it. And I think you'll leave that going, oh, okay, now I understand why this need is. That's a large dollar amount, but boy, I see where it is. I see it in terms of the square footage of pavement that we've got and the acres and acres of property that we have to maintain, and the number of roofs and HVACs and athletic fields and all of that. It was just a very, very large place, and that requires an investment of capital, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about the PI levy. FMP, totally separate conversation. Need there too. So that was the committee agenda for that evening. Board Member Cole has stepped away, so obviously he can't add any comments. But you were there.
I was there.
You were our new board member on the committee.
Oh, fine.
President Adair was there, and Board Member Brown both. So if I missed something or you wanted to highlight something, I will yield to you at this time. But that concludes my report for December.
Thank you. I do want to underscore what you just were kind of ending on there about this idea of a capital budget. And Alex did do an amazing presentation, so I do encourage board members to take a look at that, as well as our staff. I think sometimes we don't realize we go to the same work location every day. We go, the amount of just things we have, and he didn't, I know we've talked about HVAC and roofs a lot, right? Because those are kind of big ticket items. But even things like changing whiteboards or slate boards to the whiteboards to the, so how do we make learning environments? How do we add that into the capital budget? Replacing furniture, looking at carpet, the lights, the technology, theater space, athletics. I mean, all of that was in his presentation. And, it's something that as we have been, going out and talking about FMP, and we talk about, they are completely separate processes in terms of how we fund it and what we're doing. But the truth is, as soon as we build a new FMP building, it starts to get old every minute. So we need to have this idea of a capital budget. And he also laid out the lifespan of a lot of these things so that we can really start to think about it at a bigger scale and understand like what we need each year and kind of how many things we would need to replace each year in all of those big categories. So it was more than just HVAC and roofs, which are our big ticket, and we've heard a lot, and it was, and even more than what we did in the Operation Fix-It. I think there was a lot more that he talked about. So it was really exciting. I encourage board members to think about that. It is, the committee's still going to be talking about the permanent improvement levy. That's what it would be. But I think that it's something that we absolutely need. We absolutely need to do is have a capital budget each year. Board Member Beckerly?
Well, I think Brown has something.
What?
He's a committee member. I think he might have something.
Board Member Brown was not there, but I would love for Board Member Brown to talk. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, I was not there, and I was not able to join from where I was that afternoon. However, I do want to emphasize the importance of a permanent improvement levy. It was an idea that apparently Columbus had not been doing much in the past. Columbus schools had accumulated a couple $100,000 worth of deficit in funding capital repairs and doing major maintenance. And we've made a dent in that. But
Couple $100 million. I'm sorry, pardon.
Oh, yes,
You said a
I'm
couple
sorry.
100,000, just
Yes.
everybody knows. It's a couple $100 million.
And I thought
Big
I
number.
learned to tell those apart, but any of it would be welcome. But the importance of doing ongoing maintenance so that we don't get into the hole again, and so that we don't have to, on a regular, continuing basis, balance, do we put dollars into maintenance or do we put it into kids? And, you know, it's an easy, oh, but that's why we get into the hole on the maintenance side. And if we can build that permanent improvement levy, and you know, obviously some work needs to be done on how much, that'll go a long way in helping us not have those competing interests for the same dollars internally, as well as to keep our asks down going forward on other things. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it underscores this whole process about, you know, whether we talk about life cycle replacement, we talk about building new buildings, this idea that really as a community, and I'm glad that we have Matt Smito here, it's nice to see you in person. You know, underscoring this ability to work with partners, because just as we have capital needs, so does Park and Rec, so does, you know, other departments. So, you know, we're maintaining, you know, parking lots, so are they. And so, you know, just being able to have these kind of conversations around ways to do this better for taxpayers, collaborate better, that benefits our kids, it benefits our communities, and it benefits all of our pocketbooks as well. So, you know, continuing to have those kind of discussions is really important. Board Member Brown, something you mentioned made me think of that. So, good point. Good point, Board Member Brown.
Thank you. It was something that I learned when I first became a school board member in 1977-78. And that's what we were doing, and it paid off in huge ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Board Member Beckerly.
You know, back to Dr. Pierce's point about tying it all back to the goals and the guardrails, like having been in the classroom when the whiteboards weren't working, or it took, you know, 3 weeks or a month to get this stuff back, you know, get the repairs done or the wiring, like it really does affect your ability to deliver effective instruction. So I think it really is important having, you know, experienced it when it wasn't working so well or it wasn't prioritized. But for the ignorant, the uninformed, what is exactly, I mean, the process for funding a capital improvement budget is a permanent improvement levy. Is that accurate? I mean, we can't, or you take operation money and put it in a capital budget, you're not supposed to do that.
No,
Or you have to be very
you
intentional.
can.
You have to be very
But
thoughtful.
I believe Board
How do
Member,
we,
Board
how do
Member
we-
Brown spoke to the competition for dollars.
Yes,
In the general fund, there is competition for dollars for all the things that you can, the general fund can be used for anything in the district. So there's competition for those dollars. And when that resource becomes tight, when your overall expenditures begin to consume that resource, you have to get into allocations that also called reductions. Where do you look first? And I think Board Member Brown said you don't want to look to the classroom. You avoid the classroom. So in our shorthand statement, you stop cutting the grass. And then, you know, even though people complain about the grass, you go, but I didn't take it out of the classroom. So that's the competition. Having a separate source, and statutorily we have the authority and ability to levy a separate tax that is limited in its use, specifically for permanent improvements, capital budget. Those things with a 5-year useful life over a certain dollar amount, those kinds of things. To be able to do that, then ensures that the purpose of that money remains intact, and it cannot be diverted for other uses. So that's the beauty of a PI levy. I hate to say use the word guaranteed, but you're guaranteed that those dollars go towards permanent improvement. And then your general operating, if you recall years, I mean, while I've been here, we worked diligently, quite frankly, to pull capital items out of the general fund and set them up for a PI levy. 2016, we passed a $500,000 levy, generates about $4.4 million a year. You heard me earlier say that the number we probably need is closer to $45 million a year. That's not been inflated for the next 10 or 15 years yet, so you can imagine that number is probably going to go up. So that was a great, it was a nice, I'll say, gesture, but it wasn't sufficient to provide the dollars for the county capital budget. But the purpose of that was because we had the recognition that, as Board Member Brown pointed out, we got behind, and it was such a sizable dollar amount that we needed to do two things. We needed to have a dedicated levy to help address that on an ongoing basis. Quite frankly, I'll say it, we didn't do enough. And number two, we had Operation Fix-It, bond issue, borrowed money up front, get a jolt, give it, $125 million over a three to 4 year period to do some catch up against that hundreds of millions of dollars of backlogged need. So we gave a little shot in the arm with the Operation Fix-It, created a small PI for some ongoing, I mean, remember how much we need for school buses, $8 million a year. PI levy generates 4.4. Do the math. You can't buy your school bus, so that's why I came back to you in another source. And those dollars came from the general fund. We had the cash balance. We could do that. We factored it into the forecast, but it would be, I think, better to provide a separate funding source for that. That's a PI levy.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
And in 2016, that gave us a first step so that we can continue this process of establishing a PI. What we bit off, a $500,000, was important in getting us started.
Another question on another front. So you alluded to things happening at the State House that gave you some agita. What happened? I missed it.
Oh, well, they came out, they have to take what's in law,
Right.
put it into their systems to generate our statements, to make the calculations, say, okay, this is what you're going to get. So we saw that for the first time last week.
How far off was it?
Where are we in this? How many? Oh, this is, so 2 weeks ago we saw it. I'm sorry. Last week was FAC. The week before that was your org meeting. Okay. So 2 weeks ago we saw that. How far off was it in total? $13 million annual. And that's when I upset the superintendent a little bit. I probably should have texted her first or something. I didn't know. But I sent her a little email that kind of went, whoa, hello, this is off. We need, we're going to stop, drop, and roll. I like that phrase for some reason. Because we need to pay attention to this. And I put some folks on digging into it. And so being off like that, what's the driver? And so we began to learn that some of the data may not be the right data to use. There's some things in law that may not be right.
On their end.
On the statutory end. So there's some, I think there's talk about, where is he? You talk about a fix?
There's some discussion being made that there may potentially be a fix.
Okay.
A cleanup bill, if you will.
And then also just working through the mechanics of how they codified that formula. So you just have to wait and keep checking. It's just a matter of let's get it right. We'll get there. But it caused enough of a concern that I wanted to push kind of the pause button and say, rather than make this plan, 13 million. If I'm off by if that number's off by 13 million and I'm doing a 10-year plan, that's a big number.
Right.
That'll move the needle a bit.
Board Member Vera.
Thank you, Treasurer. This was really helpful. And earlier you kind of mentioned the importance of prioritizing what is very important to us as a district. what all goes into how do we prioritize when you look at these revenues and expenditures? Is that something we're working with auditing committee to look at, like the surveys that are out, for example? How are we looking at like what's a priority for the district, and how many team members are a part of that process when we're making our budgets and we're kind of doing this comparison of what we thought we were going to spend versus what we actually spend? Like, how involved is our stakeholders in this process of prioritizing where we spend?
Pretty much that process is 95%, 98% my office and my staff. The number of folks that I have that have done this work before on staff, we if I have a question, if I want to make sure I'm looking at it correctly, we work together on that. We have a great connection with the school finance department at ODE, so we can talk to them directly about some of the things that we see. And I routinely collaborate with other colleagues around the state. I have a weekly call with Akron, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo, Akron, yes, 5 of us. We have a weekly call. So we're sharing those concepts, or those comments and concerns. So I think that answers your question. It's me. It's my department. The 5-year forecast and those numbers are mine.
I think that's it, and I thank you for answering that. And I think kind of what we've kind of saw, like the consensus here today, kind of going back into like the goals and the guardrails as we're looking at, how we move forward as an entity, as a board, and in comparison to like our future forecast. I did get to see the 5-year projections, and just looking at, how we're evaluating the budget aspect in regards to what we've identified as our goals and guardrails for the district moving forward. One thing I did have a question about, and forgive me if I don't know, is there some type of glossary or something that the public has access to really further understand reports like this, like the term underplan, like as just a community member or a parent listening, is there a way that they can fully understand like what that means to them when we use terminology like that?
I don't know that there's a glossary per se. One of the things that I've been doing for numerous years is a management discussion and analysis. We call it an MD&A, and that's really my financial report. The preamble to that generally stays the same every month because it discusses what is the plan based upon, and some of the, how to read the reports and what some of the numbers refer to. So, if you read that first, and if that's not sufficient, then let me know and I'll ramp it up a little bit.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Great, thank you so much, Treasurer.
Oh, one last thing I forgot.
Oh.
You do have at your desk a nice report. It is called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. ACFR is what we like to call it. Used to be called something different, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, but we changed its name because the acronym needed to be changed. So you have a copy of this report. It's what we put out annually. It is what gets audited. It is, quite frankly, primarily great for when we go out for debt issuances. It's not something that we manage from because we're a cash basis organization, so we really manage from the forecast, which is cash basis. This is accrual and modified accrual. We engage LGS, Local Government Services, with the Auditor of State's office to help us perform that. We call this a conversion. It's a GAAP conversion. So we're converting from cash basis over to this basis of accounting. And we put that report out. It gets audited, and it is the one that we have for, I probably should be able to tell you this, but we submit it to both the Government Finance Officers Association and the National Association and the Association of School Business Officials. And they both put out certificates of excellence in financial reporting, and they have reviewers go through this report, look at it not only for comment, but format and layout, size of font, where you put dollar signs and where you don't put dollar signs. And they have, and Carolyn sits on the GASB board, which sets out pronouncements for how you're supposed to report all this stuff. So they make sure that we do that correctly. correctly. And we've received that certificate of excellence for literally decades at this point. So it's now, Board Member Vera, you asked me, who's responsible for those numbers, who's responsible for this report, and while my name's on it, I do very little with that. Staff does that. So Scott Gooding, his budget team, and others go out. Jenny Vanover has worked on it. Eric writes a section for it. I take a look at it. I oversee some things. Occasionally I'll ask a question. I get lucky sometimes. You open up a report, somehow you can go and find a digits off or something. I get lucky sometimes doing that. But it is really the staff that puts this together. And I know it's begun. I know we're in the middle of an audit. And at some point, Scott will come to me and say, the ACFR's done. It's been filed. We're good to go. The audit letter comes out from AOS, and it all gets completed. But that's a staff effort right there. And we publish it in-house.
Thank you. Thank you to your staff, team,
Yes.
And one
for
quick
doing this.
question, is this available online?
Yes, sir, as are numerous previous years.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Let's go ahead and move into board matters. Item 7. First is a COVID update. We are actually going to have Dr. Dixon.
Yes, thank you, President Adair. Earlier today, I had an opportunity to stand alongside several of our civic leaders to meet with the local media and talk about the importance of keeping our students in school and in their classrooms as much as possible. I would like to share my appreciation to Board Member Michael Cole, Mifflin Middle School parent Leo Carter, Mayor Andrew Ginther, City Council President Shannon Hardin, Franklin County Commissioner Erica Crawley, Columbus Public Health Commissioner Dr. Mashika Roberts, and Columbus Partnership President and CEO Kenny McDonald. I'd like to thank them for joining me this morning. It is encouraging and energizing to have the support of so many of our partners. As I said during a press conference, we cannot do this work alone. It takes an entire city of partners to come together, especially in critical times, to do what's best for kids. And what's best right now is being in person, in classroom, to the greatest extent possible, because we know that's where students are safest. Our schools offer students so much of what they need to grow and thrive academically, socially, and emotionally. And that's due to the outstanding educators, principals, and support staff that we have in our buildings. What is happening in Columbus right now is not unique to Columbus. It's happening all over the United States. Schools are grappling with the challenge of maintaining in-person learning in light of increased staff absences. Like many other districts, we have taken a daily approach to making learning model determinations building by building. Our process involves looking at the number of absences, the types of absences, and substitute coverage in each school, starting in the afternoon and continuing to the evening and early morning hours. We know that schools that must transition to remote learning for the next day, when we know the schools that must transition to remote learning for the next day, we notify families and staff as quickly as possible in the evening. If more absences come in early the next morning, we send out additional notifications to the affected school communities. This process has allowed us to safely have as many students as possible in their schools for in-person learning. Over the 9 days that Columbus City Schools was in session the past 2 weeks, we averaged more than 100 schools open for in-person learning, available to serve more than 40,000 students in our city each day. That leaves an average of 11 schools each day in remote learning. Our principals and teachers have stepped up to ensure continuity of education for those students and minimize disruptions to curriculum and coursework. With support and resources from the academic services team, schools have effectively delivered remote instruction until they're able to transition back to in-person classes. In total, 41 of our 112 schools have had at least 1 day of remote learning over the past 2 weeks, The remaining 71 schools have held in-person classes every day. One of the staffing challenges we continue to face is the shortage of bus drivers. We have spoken at length throughout the school year about needing more bus drivers to cover all of our routes for Columbus City Schools, charter, and non-public students across our city. This issue has been heightened over the past 2 weeks by an increased number of absences among our drivers. An average of 125 drivers are absent each day, forcing our transportation team to double up and delay routes. Our transportation absences were so severe on Friday, January 7th, that we were forced to cancel all classes and busing for the day. Despite these issues, I commend our transportation team for working diligently each day to serve our community as best as possible and communicate quickly and efficiently when delays and problems occur. We also continue to aggressively recruit drivers and trainees and offer evening classes through our adult education program for applicants to obtain their CDL permit and required endorsements in order to become certified drivers. As we typically encounter this time of year, we have had heating issues arise in a handful of our school buildings. When the heat is inoperable, we do not hold in-person classes. Heating issues have affected the learning model for just 4 of our schools over the past 2 weeks. Thanks to the work of our maintenance team, who responds quickly to all issues and requests so that we can make the necessary repairs as soon as possible. The past 2 weeks have not been easy, but I want to applaud everyone impacting the work happening in Columbus City Schools. Despite the challenges we have faced, our entire district has stepped up in every opportunity to support students and fellow staff members. Whether that's been covering classes, quick responses to maintenance issues, or delivering additional PPE materials for the classrooms, we recognize the importance of being there for our CCS family. Our students deserve to be in school, and I appreciate the efforts of our teachers, principals, staff, and partners to make that happen. Our public health experts have been critical partners throughout the pandemic. We continue to rely on their guidance for determining our mitigation strategies in school buildings. These protocols include universal masking, supplying the necessary PPE materials, frequent hand washing, social distancing where practical, cleaning and sanitizing, and providing free at-home test kits to students and staff. I now would like to welcome Nationwide Children's Hospital pediatrician and district medical consultant, Dr. Bodie, and Ohio State University College of Public Health professor and CATS data specialist, Dr. Hyder, to talk about the public health data that they are seeing in our community and in our school buildings. Dr. Bodie and Dr. Hyder.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Dixon. So I'm going to start off by just giving us a brief update and report about what we're seeing in the city of Columbus from Columbus Public Health overall with COVID right now. And then Dr. Hyder is going to give us a much more intimate look as it relates to the school district for our students and staff. And this is the data that we follow on a daily, weekly basis as we meet together to review what is going on in our school district in regards to COVID. So to start, just to give some brief background about what we're seeing in the city of Columbus. As everyone knows, starting the week really of Christmas and thereafter, we anticipated and saw a surge in COVID cases due to the new Omicron variant. That surge has definitely continued and has been showing an increased caseload over the past few weeks. But there is some bright spots for this. So we have data through January 10th, and what that does show us is we are seeing a slight decrease in the positivity rate in our community. So it went from 33% down to 26%. This is really important for us because what it tells us is that we haven't seen a further increase in the surge. It has stabilized. We are also seeing a 7-day case rate of about 1,600 cases per 100,000 people. So that is about a 1.6% positivity rate in our population in the area of Columbus. The other important information to note is that we are seeing an increase in vaccination rates too. So for Franklin County, we have 65% of the county that have started their vaccine process and 60% that have completed it. This is really hopeful. This is actually one of the highest vaccination rates in the state of Ohio. In the city of Columbus, we've made great strides in these past few months, and we are at 58% of the population within the city of Columbus that has started the vaccination process and 53% that has completed it. So as these numbers continue to go up, that is also a hopeful sign that we are going to use that to stabilize during this current surge and not have a further increase in either positivity rate or that 7-day case rate. And we will continue to monitor this with our partners at Columbus Public Health, again, on that daily and weekly basis as we look through these reports and determine any significant concerns or hotspots or changes in the rate. So Dr. Hyder is actually a professor at faculty at the Ohio State University College of Public Health. And so he's going to share with us some of our specific data that we use and review every, again, day and week as it relates to the school district. Dr. Hyder.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me again. I think there are some slides. Okay, I see the slides. I just need to make sure I change my, oh. Okay, I think for me, it's not showing the slides on the main screen. Oh, okay, there we go. Now we go, okay. So good afternoon, oh, good evening, actually. So this is, go back just one slide. I'm here on as part of a project that started with the start of this pandemic called CATS, and that stands for COVID-19 Analytics and Targeted Surveillance System for School. And this briefing is specifically for the Columbus City School District. Next slide. Just as a background for those who may not be familiar with, we partner with both the local health departments here in Columbus and Franklin County, as well as the ESCCO that serves Central Ohio. And this year we're partnering up with the 16 school districts in Franklin County. And we have been working primarily on supporting the local health department. So next slide. And our role has mainly been in supporting in a way that integrates data across a variety of metrics, provides highly granular data at the building level, at the school district level, at the building attendance area level, with the objective really to inform leaders like all of you, but also to keep parents and students and staff updated about what are some of the rationale for the changes in learning strategies, which is less relevant this year, but more so was last year. Next slide. And just to reiterate that we have this background role in terms of providing additional lead time to Dr. Bodie and to Dr. Roberts, the staff at the Columbus City School District on lead time to bring about that or enforce that school-based response and the community response. And so we're not doing outbreak investigation at all. We're primarily doing what's called syndromic surveillance in terms of looking at multiple data points. Next slide. So the couple of questions that I'm going to be, hopefully will provide you some answers to today are, what are the trends that we see in COVID-19 cases in the Columbus City School attendance area? Like I said, we do this work for all the school districts in Franklin County. And so we look at the attendance area as a way to provide more granular data for the school district to make its decisions. The second question that I'll try to answer is, how do the trends that we see in COVID-19 cases in the CCS attendance area compare with other school districts in Franklin County? That is important just to be able to see what you're doing, how it's working compared to some of the other districts. And then the third question is, what are the trends in COVID-19 cases that are reported to CCS? And that is, there's a typo I see in question 4 already. But that's where we're trying to look at the cases that are reported to the school district specifically, because we're able to get that granular data and see what are the trends in those cases, but also how do those trends vary by the region for a CCS. So that's question number 4. Next slide. So this first question, I'm showing you a graph that reiterates what Dr. Bodie was saying about this slight decline that we're seeing. And this is a decline that we saw this rapid increase right after the Christmas holidays. And then we saw this, sustained bump when schools reopened, but then we're starting to see this decline. And so cases have been trending downwards since January 10th is when this downward trend started here in the Columbus City School attendance area. Next slide. And so comparatively, you might think, oh, that's a very high peak. But when we compare that with other school districts, Columbus City School District is actually, there are 9 other school districts that have a case rate higher than the CCS in the Franklin County area. So of the 17 school districts, if you include Licking Heights, for example, CCS is sort of in the middle of the pack in terms of where its 14-day case rate currently is. And the decline that we have been seeing in the CCS attendance area actually started about a week or earlier than many of the larger school districts in Franklin County. So that is good, because when we are looking for declines, a 1-week decline isn't that big of a deal, but 2 weeks decline in a row is great. And we also look at these rates by age group. And so when we adjust these rates by age group, what we see is that the cases among school-age children, so in these age categories in this last point here, they are starting to slow down and are actually lower in the CCS attendance area compared to several of the larger school districts in Franklin County. So that's how CCS attendance area, the rates in it, compare with other surrounding districts. Just to give you some context, even if you see a fast increase in cases, relatively speaking, Columbus City School District and the city of Columbus, the coordination that they have had is what I think is driving these better than expected trends for the CCS attendance area. Next slide. Now, in terms of cases that are reported to CCS directly, what we saw is that almost nearly a half of the number of cases compared to last week among students. So cases that were reported COVID-19 positive cases among students, those continue to go down compared to the first week of school. And in some regions, they're approximately half of that. We also see comparable trends in the staff cases that CCS staff are reporting to the district. And so those trends are also declining, similar to what we're seeing in the students. And then the next slide, which is the last slide. What we can also look at is which school buildings and which regions are these trends more likely than not. And so that helps to inform the decision-making in terms of allocating resources or mitigation strategies in different regions. And what we see is that except the Northeast region, and I just ran the numbers just before this report, so these slides don't reflect that, but there are about 2 or 3 other regions where the cases are not going up, they are continuing to decline, or they are declining slower than some of the other regions. So in a nutshell, what we're seeing is that things are heading in the right direction within the cases that are reported among students and staff within the school to the school district. They're also heading in the right direction. And it will be some time, just kind of forecasting forward, it will be some time before we reach the kind of levels that we had pre this current surge, but we're certainly heading in the right direction. So that's all that I wanted to share, and happy to stay on if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hyder. So I did just want to add that data that the CATS team provides, it is also accessible on the CCS dashboard too, the COVID-19 dashboard. And we, again, look at that as an aggregate level, and then we break it down even per building, per grade level. So if there are any concerning signs in a specific small area, that we can identify those quickly and contact appropriate staff and talk through what we are seeing in the data. So again, we look at this data on a daily basis to kind of monitor that. And so some hopeful trends that we're seeing that maybe this surge is sort of, heading again in that downward trend right now. And we're happy to take any questions.
Is that okay to do questions now? All right. Yes, we have questions. Excuse me. We're going to go with Board Member Beckerly, then Vera, then Brown.
Thank you so much for being with us and sharing this data with us. I'm trying hard to figure out how to reconcile it with sort of, what we hear from the community and, what exactly we can conclude. For example, for question 4, it says nearly half compared last week compared to the first week of school. Now, that sounds wonderful, but based on what's happening out in the community, I mean, how do we, we're not down 50%, we're not down 25%. Like, how do we make sense of this? Like, and maybe I should just share. My concern is that, do we know where we have good data coming in? And it sounds to me like, and why I'm encouraged by this, is that we're doing some triangulation, like comparing the rates we're seeing to the rates that are being reported in the community in general. So I think the answer is we do have some confidence, but can you just kind of explain that a little bit better?
I'll start. Thank you so much, Board Member Beckerly, and then Dr. Hyder, I'll have you add in with your specific data. But one thing to say is that we do have different data points to ensure that we are having accurate data. So as Dr. Hyder mentioned, it might be all children that live within the attendance area, that we can pull those numbers of rates of COVID and compare that to reporting that's being done on school-age children that are actually attending those schools in question too. And so we can take a look and determine what we're seeing as far as trends and making sure that we're having, again, that good, valid, accurate data. So I think, we've been doing this since the start of the pandemic, and those sources have been, kind of vetted and worked out and monitored from that level. I do also think we are seeing improvements. And so going down by half, it is a really exciting, positive improvement. But from what Dr. Hyder showed, we are still in the middle of this surge, right? So that improvement has not gotten us back to where we were, let's say, in November. So we are still at a higher case rate. And what we're seeing is that within schools, the community case rate gets reflected, right? So as more people in the community have COVID, a higher percentage of school-age children will also test positive. And so we are seeing that. But what we are not seeing is a higher number of students within a school setting outside of what's happening in the community. And that's really important to us because we're not seeing that significant concern that there's been a super spreader event in a school that has led to an even larger percentage than what we would expect. And so that's really what we look at and monitor. Do you have anything to add, Dr. Hyder?
Yeah, I would just add that the data source that we're getting is from what's called the Ohio Disease Reporting System, ODRS. And so that is the system that drives the COVID dashboards that the state of Ohio, the Department of Health reports. what we get is the individual level data that allows us to triangulate it in this way, and that allows us to provide much more granularity. The other thing that we do is make sure that we have a series of checks and balances on the data quality. So for example, the reporting lag issue that was affecting the ODH data and their dashboards respectively, we did not put out a weekly report like we typically do that Franklin County posts on their website, because we did not have confidence in the numbers that were being reported. And so the other thing we have done is work actively with the Columbus City School District staff to ensure that they understand the assumptions, the way that we are processing the data, the way we're filtering it, the biases and the assumptions that are made with each of the data points. And we use a number of staff absences, student nurse visits, student absences to look at. And we also have historical data on each of these to look at, does the trend that we're seeing, does it make sense in light of what previously was seen? So, we've learned and we've implemented those learnings from last year into this year. And so we make sure that we know what's at stake in this case. And so we do our best and make sure that we provide a rigorous approach to these assessments and in these briefings.
Thank you. That's terrific, and it's important, and I think this is worth saying, because anecdotally we will hear from people in the community who say, well, these cases didn't get reported in this school, or we're overwhelmed and we're not getting it, and so and it's a legitimate concern from the person on the ground who sees it and thinks, this can't be true. I'm experiencing this awful rate of cases in the building I'm in, or I see a nurse that's not necessarily, so overwhelmed she can't get all the data in, or he can't get all the data in, and that sort of thing. And then they start to question. So the fact that you can provide us assurance that you're triangulating what we're telling you with what's happening in the community and other data points is really a comfort for us, so that we know what's happening on the ground, and what we think is happening on the ground is really what's happening on the ground. So I have to say I'm very grateful for that, and I'm grateful to have this report and this conversation. The other thing that I wanted to ask was, and this is sort of part of the, arm us with information so we can assure the community kind of thing. One of our coaches has told us, what do we say when somebody stops us in the grocery store, right? And so the next question I guess I have is sort of intuitively, gathering 46,000 students in buildings with teachers and staff seems counter to what you would think we're supposed to do in a pandemic, when we're supposed to be trying to stop the spread. And I think I understand the answer to why we're not worried about that. And it's a series of things. But is it that what Dr. Bodie said, there's no super spreader event? In other words, the rates we're seeing in our building are no different than the rates we're seeing outside our building, so we know that we're not contributing to community spread by having the students gather. Is that accurate? Or can you get me to say it better?
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Beckerly. So really what we've seen is that the transmission occurs primarily in these social settings. So as you can imagine, think about when everyone was home for the 2-week break over that holiday period of time. That's when there were a lot of social gatherings, and we saw, of course, right, that original spike with this Omicron variant. And so as children leave the school setting, they are not alone. And so as we see rates of COVID in the community, and families and neighbors and friends and everyone as they interact in a multitude of different ways, that is an unstructured environment, and often leads to significant prolonged contact that is unstructured, unmasked, and tends to be the driving force for this current spread of COVID. So what we've seen, that in a structured school setting where students are there throughout the day, and we have those mitigation measures in place with the universal masking, all the pieces that Dr. Dixon had reviewed, that has allowed us to have these congregate settings that are structured, that don't, again, contribute to an increased risk for those students to be contracting COVID. Does that mean that you can never spread COVID within a school?
Sure.
No, we absolutely can't say that. It's not a magical place where the virus, exits at the door. But by putting those measures into place, we are having the greatest chance of success of limiting that exposure, so that we're really, again, not seeing that that's a higher chance of, contracting COVID and having those large spreading events within the school setting. And so, we know how important it is to be in-person learning. And so because that is critical, this is our way forward through this pandemic, by doing everything possible we can to make this as safe of an environment as we can, so that kids can be in-person learning during the day and not be at increased risk of contracting COVID. And I think that's what we've been able to maintain. I know Dr. Hyder had shared just some general statements about school districts that did or did not have universal masking requirements around the state of Ohio, that he saw in the data. And I don't know if you could share a little bit about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, so early on when the school year started, we did a analysis looking at what was the proportion of cases among 0 to 11 years old among districts that required masking across all grade levels. So that's universal masking was recommended, compared to districts that did not require universal masking, in the sense that some grade levels said yes, were required, others were recommended, but not required. And what we saw in the data up until the start of the school year, up until the middle of September, was that because in the middle of September, many school districts changed their policies. And so that's why to account for that bias, we only looked at, start of the school year up until the middle. And by then the 0 to 11 years old were also, I believe the vaccines were not available for them up until, right? So we looked at the burden on them. And what we found was a statistically significant difference in the proportion of cases, in the sense that the school districts that were not requiring masks universally had a higher proportion of cases among 0 to 11 years old versus those districts that were requiring masks universally. The other thing that we saw specifically for Columbus City School District is that continuously the proportion of kids 0 to 11 have been below 10%, whereas in several other districts that's not the case. Columbus also has one of the lowest rates of cases among 5 to 9 years old when we adjust for the difference in population size. Also for 10 to 14, it's sort of in the middle. So just to reiterate that with some of the additional data points, that what Dr. Bodie is saying about schools, they're really reflecting what's going on in the community. And so we're not, Columbus being the largest district, if there was any effect of schools having on the community, we would have seen that in Columbus's rates. But Columbus is sort of in the middle of the pack in terms of its rate across a number of age groups.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate you taking the time to explain that and answer my question.
Thank you. Board Member Vera.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Superintendent, and all of the other team members for this important data. So I have a few just kind of clarifying questions. I think the data is super important. Like, we want to know where we are at as a district, because a lot of the calls and emails we get is in, like, who's advising us in terms of how we are running day-to-day operations. So I really appreciate this data. What my question is in regards to, what we're also hearing in the community. We're hearing from, teachers, saying that they want us to come to their buildings. And so part of that, my question is Dr. Bodie and your team, how many of you and just administration, how many of you are actually visiting our school sites in terms of what you're seeing hands-on, because I think that's a big part of it from Dr. Bodie's perspective. I know she mentioned earlier just what she's seeing. But I guess I'm questioning, like, who's in our buildings? Who's going to check our buildings? Who's checking with our teachers to really understand kind of what's going on a site-to-site basis? Although I understand the data, I think the data is extremely important. But what I want to understand is, how is our team feeling supported in midst of all of what's happening right now? And I know that they're not feeling that way because we have a box behind us of teachers saying, please come to our school. So I guess I want to understand, what is the team's kind of tackle or plan of action for how we're visiting schools, how we're kind of addressing site-to-site based issues, because we've also been hearing a lot about PPE shortages in regards to cleaning efforts. So I guess with some of the stuff that we're hearing, what are we doing about cleaning efforts, additional cleaning efforts? What are we doing about site visits to make sure that we are not just kind of looking at this from a high overview as a county, but about our buildings specifically? Like, how often are we visiting our sites, and kind of, can you speak a little bit to that?
Is that question for me or for them?
I think it's a combination. I want to understand how often Dr. Bodie is actually visiting our sites, and kind of understanding what exactly, I understand the premise about what she's doing to help us, but is she kind of frontline with you in our site buildings in that process?
Right. So one, Dr. Hyder and Dr. Bodie is just delivering us the data of what's happening, right? Their data is how this virus is impacting our school community. What we as administrators, building level administrators, or central office administrators going to check, we're checking in with our building principals. So if our building principals need additional PPE sent to their schools, there's a mechanism for them to send additional PPE out. I'm visiting buildings, the area superintendents are visiting buildings. And so there is a check and balance. And if our principals need additional materials, they know how to advocate. So for example, I was meeting with the principals of Region 3, and I had 2 principals said they needed child size masks for the middle schools. And we sent those masks to those 2 middle schools. But Mr. Odom reminded us of the process. He said, yes, we can get those to them, but just remember, principals, this is how you request those, so those masks can come to you immediately. And we want to make sure too that we're not overwhelming our buildings with a lot of extra people being in our buildings, right? But we are out there. The area superintendents are, central office. Recently, we've had central office staff members that are being in substituting. So we have that. So we understand that people are, this is a pandemic, and people have concerns, and they may be concerned about having additional masks. We sent out 45,000 additional masks to our teachers 2 weeks ago, KN90 and KN95 masks to our staff members. Remember when our nurses stated that they were being overwhelmed by contact tracing. So we provided additional support for them to do the contact tracing, so they are not doing that heavy lift. So I believe we have the mitigation strategies in place. If there's room for improvement, we are always here to listen and get some information back to our buildings if we need it. I was out visiting Leewood Elementary last Friday, and the teachers were saying thank you. And Leewood Elementary has been in school every day since we returned in January, and they were so proud of that and saying, keep our students in schools. And I was asking, what is it that you need? And so I think I know we're doing that. And if schools, building principals are if they need something, they have a mechanism. Parsons Elementary, the heating was out and they needed some additional support. So Dr. James and I went over personally and went to investigate and see what else additional resources that they need. So we are making sure that Dr. Bowden, Dr. Hyder, and Dr. Roberts are advising us on what's happening with the COVID cases, ensuring additional support that we need as far as vaccinations, testing kits, COVID testing kits, et cetera. So that's just some of the on the ground support that we're providing. We recognize that, again, as you heard, as CEA stated, they want us to take a 2-week pause. And we listened to our medical experts that told us that this virus is here. And so what we want to make sure that we are, providing the supports that our building principals and our teachers need. We talked about masks. There was a conversation about a month ago about making sure we're wearing our mask appropriately. And so we're doing videos with students, telling their peers, demonstrating to their peers about wearing their masks appropriately. So we, on our weekly calls, we have our union leaders on the weekly calls with us as we're listening to the data from Dr. Bodie and Dr. Hyder and Dr. Roberts, and as they advise us what's happening with the virus. So I believe we have the steps in place. Again, if there's ever a principal that needed support, they can go to their area superintendents. If there's teachers, they can definitely go to their principals. But we have the supports in place to provide the additional PPE. The buildings are being cleaned. Dr. James and Maurice Odom are ensuring that is happening. But we believe that we have all the mitigation strategies in place. And if we need something, people have to tell us.
Right.
And if they don't tell us, we won't know. But when they tell us, we immediately address those concerns at that individual school.
Thank you, Superintendent. So just to clarify, if teachers need something, they're to go to their principals, who then go to their area superintendents, which then report to you. Is that our formal process for how teachers are to ask for things, or principals are asked the things that they need for their building?
Yeah, anytime teachers need anything, their building principal is their first line. That's the job of the building principal, to make sure that teachers have what they need so they can teach, and teachers make sure students have what they need so they can learn. Right. So we've always said to our building principals teachers, to go to your building principals, and those building principals, if they cannot find a solution, then those building principals reach out to their area superintendents, and those area superintendents know how to reach out to other central office staff to provide additional support.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned that the buildings are getting cleaned. So is that something additional to what we already do in terms of our janitorial support? Is there any additional commercial or anybody coming in to really, because I know that was something that was also being talked about, like the schools needing a deep clean in terms of what the teachers have been recommending. So what are we doing in regards to that?
Board President Adair, Board Member Vieira. So we've outfitted our custodial staff in the buildings with sanitizing foggers. They've been using that. We've also and this board has approved a variety of purchase orders for, the sanitizers and also the masks, which we have in the warehouse. We have a lot of things that are also coming in, and we put in an order with the ESC to get some additional supplies from the state. So all of those things are in place. When Dr. Dixon and I visited buildings, we can see the adequate bottled water, because I know before there was a concern about water fountains that have been covered, but there's adequate bottled water, in the building. So they are practicing those sanitation with our custodial staff.
Thank you for clarifying. And I just want to kind of, I know, which I think is great, and everybody's really working super hard. And so I want to, just thank all of you, all of our teachers, janitor. I recognize there's a lot that needs to happen. Just some of the safety concerns, just being in one of our buildings this past Friday, attending a game, when that game was over, I didn't necessarily see a lot of those extra cleaning steps that we're talking about. So I think it's just, maybe having more conversations with each site just to ensure that, we are, following those cleaning procedures, because I think that's a big thing we're hearing across the threshold, not just from our teachers, but parents, and feeling like there's not enough sanitizing going on. So just as a suggestion, that's just what kind of comes across my desk. I did visually see that myself on Friday, And so, you know, it's just so that we can get better, right? That's really what it's about. One of the other things that Superintendent, you mentioned earlier, you know, what are we doing about staffing for substitutes? I know that's been kind of like a consensus across the board, and you kind of talked a little bit about it in your initial report. But is there anything additional we're doing to help provide some substitute staffing?
Just recruiting.
Okay.
You know, there's a shortage, there's a national shortage of staffing in every area. So, you know, the board approved some months ago to increase salaries. So we want to make sure that our wages were competitive, you know, in the region. We are still working to recruit. You know, there's a national shortage, but we are asking retired. We had some retirees who, and many of the retirees have kind of stuck with us and are still helping. We're recruiting college students and recent college graduates. And so we are working hard to try to get as many substitutes as needed in our buildings. And many buildings have permanent subs. So many buildings decided early this year to get permanent subs for those specific buildings. And then when possible, we are asking for volunteers. We're calling, I know some of our, Dr. Chapman, her office, are calling retired principals to come in and fill in when our administrators are ill. But we are working on recruitment, long-term recruitment strategies to get more teachers. But getting substitutes, we are competing with districts around the county to get substitute teachers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Board Member Brown.
Thank you. I want to go back to our experts.
Yes.
I think we still have those. And just one question, and that is with respect to the vaccination rates. And, you know, we've got some good information that was presented tonight. But in terms of how those rates are determined, I'm aware that with respect to who is fully vaccinated, that there are varying opinions or that it's changing in terms of what's considered fully vaccinated, whether it's the 2 doses plus a booster or not. But so at that end, I don't expect any good answer, but if you have one, I'd be happy to hear it. But at the other side, there's a lot of reporting of this % of the population has had their first dose. And in addition, you know, and here's how many are fully vaccinated, whatever that means. So on first dose, what's the significance of that? What does that mean? Does it mean anything for protection for all of us or for that individual? Or is it just a bigger number so it looks nice?
Thank you, Board Member Brown. To answer your first question, the current data that I presented tonight, the official, designation of full vaccination has not changed at this time. It is still completion of the primary series, so it does not include the booster dose. Although we do have data information that I can send, that looks at the doses as they include booster doses. But we follow the federal designation at this time from the CDC, and so those numbers were completion of the primary series at this point in time. They are also of the entire population, so they actually do include people that aren't eligible for vaccination as well. So again, that 0 to 5 age range is part of our population. So when we talk about, for example, 65% of the county has started the vaccination process, it will never get to 100% or not yet until the vaccine is approved for younger age, just to mention. The reason why we actually have that % of first dose and completion is because it gives us an idea of the number of people who are hopefully starting the vaccination process. So what we do know is that through this recent surge in the Omicron variant, one of the silver lining positive effects of that is it did encourage some additional people in our community who maybe were hesitant before to go ahead and start the vaccination process. So we're always looking at those two numbers try to determine how many new families and patients and students in our district are starting that. I can tell you that for our pediatric vaccination process through Nationwide Children's Hospital, as an example, we do routine follow-up with all of our families that did not complete a second dose or did not come to that follow-up appointment for the second dose, and really work with those families to get that completed. And that includes the students that get vaccinated through the district at schools as well. So if they were absent on the second time we came around, that's not the end of it. We reach out to those families and arrange a way to get them that second dose of the vaccine. So again, we can ensure that they complete the series. Because to your point, what we know is that that completion of the series is really important to offer that person full protection from the virus.
Thank you. And just the one point, does partial, one dose provide protection at all? Or is it just indicates that they're on the right path to getting fully vaccinated?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It does provide some protection, but what we know is that we really need that second dose and importantly, the booster dose now too, to have that ongoing protection over the weeks and months. So although that might be providing them protection in the short term, if they don't complete that vaccination series, that protection is likely to wane for them over a period of time. And so that's the concern about not finishing the series.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pierce.
Thank you so much, Board President Adair. Dr. Dixon, thank you for this report. Dr. Bodie and Dr. Hyder, thank you. My first question goes to Dr. Bodie. You indicated that 58% have completed full vaccination and 53% have started. If we're looking at 100%, those numbers are off. So can you explain to me the 58%? Is that adults? Is that children? What is the universe or the population for that 58% as well as the 53%?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So maybe I misspoke when I gave you those numbers, but 58% in Columbus have started the vaccination process and 53% have completed it. So really that's just telling you that there are 5% more of our eligible population that have started it. So that's how those numbers work. So again, it's trying to give you that picture or slice of that, hopefully an additional 5% of our population that is heading towards completing their vaccination series and may not have yet because of timing even, because we follow this trend on a weekly basis. So we update those numbers through Columbus Public Health once a week. So we hope that both of those numbers will continue to rise and that second number of 53% will, of course, eventually, hopefully, over a 3-week period, get up to 58 as the rest of that population completes the series.
And so that includes adults and children in that vaccination number?
It does, and it includes all children. So again, even children that are 0 to 5, who some of them may not be eligible yet for the vaccine. So again, that's all population across Columbus.
My next question, thank you for that, I appreciate it. My next question then relates to, I guess, one of the trends that we're seeing in the Northeast region. What do we relate that to in terms of specifically, is there going to be more efforts in those particular regions to ensure there's opportunities not just for vaccination, but also for testing? Because I would venture to say that we just don't have some numbers because some people just simply aren't testing. They think it's a cold or they think it's a sore throat when it's actually COVID.
Thank you. That's a great question. So as Dr. Hyder mentioned, as we follow this by region, it's really to look at small trends or changes in the overall rate of what we're seeing as far as student level data for positive COVID cases. So although that region, it is still decreasing, it just was not decreasing at the same level or rate as some of the other regions. So first, I don't want to give the impression that it is really far off of the other regions. But, again, we follow those trends over time, and I think that's really important to do. So what that might tell us, or what we might look at then, is what are we seeing in that region, and do we need to, again, really look at all of the strategies we have in place for mitigation measures, be reaching out to our school nurses, hearing any concerns they have in those areas. We do specifically, as I mentioned, look at it by building level and even by grade and classroom level too. So if someone in the school building has a specific concern about, to your point, hey, there's been 5 students out with symptoms, but they haven't, they've just been home and didn't get tested. And that's information actually that they bring to us as the health services team. We look at those every single day and make a determination of whether we're seeing, again, a concern as far as an outbreak. So to give you an example, we've had examples where there's been a small class size of maybe 8 students with special healthcare needs that have mask exemptions, legitimate mask exemptions. And if those 8 students, if 4 of those students are out ill, even if they don't have a COVID designation, maybe they haven't had a chance to get tested yet, that's going to set up a red flag to the teacher and to the school nurse, and again to our health services team to take a look and determine, do we need to do additional testing or identification of that classroom, or are those remaining students, are they needing to be remote for a period of time because they're likely close contacts? So those are all things that we look at on a very granular level, again, not only just by the building, but by the classroom.
And I appreciate that, because as we think about next steps and what needs to continually happen to ensure that we have a safe and healthy learning environment for our students and staff, we've really had this conversation around the classroom, right? And as a parent of students who are playing extracurricular activities in the middle school and in the high school, those are social environments where they're outside of the classroom, they're sharing team meals, masks are coming down. We have the new safety guidelines around test to play. So can you all speak to how these numbers are the trends that we're seeing in our athletic teams? I mean, we've had teams that have completely had to cancel and call off games because so many of their players have COVID. And for us to not include that as an aspect of this conversation is concerning to me. So how does all of this relate to our extracurricular activities, be it sports, be it theater, be it band?
Yes, thank you. So first, to start off with, test to play is an important added safety measure that we are following in the Columbus City School District, and it relates to all extracurricular activities. So even test to play is playing in any of those activities. So whether that's sports, or to your point, band or theater, or all of those activities, again, where you're after school and in a congregate setting doing the sanctioned activity. So what we see when we have that test to play is that anytime there has been a positive COVID case in one student that has been participating in that activity, then that triggers really some extra monitoring of everyone else that's on that team or on that band or theater group to test if they want to stay and play. And so they have to test right as soon as we know about the exposure, and that test needs to be negative for them to keep coming to practice or games. And then they test again days 5 to 7 after the exposure to ensure again that that is still a negative test. So that really helps us, because if we are seeing those positive cases, if there was transmission at the time that one athlete had a positive COVID test, we're able to quickly isolate those students with positive tests and then of course have them home. So it really helps us to continue to avoid, again, a large outbreak that may occur if students don't know that they have COVID and are continuing to come to those environments where, as you said, there might not be as structured of mitigation measures happening. And so that's been a really important strategy. We have been fortunate to work with the Ohio Department of Health closely to get a significant amount of tests, even at a time where testing has been difficult to find in other places. So those participants in those activities are actually provided that test that they can take home and do, and it is proctored in order for them to get a valid test and result. I will say some athletes have chosen just to, again, for their own safety, not play for that period of time. So even if they did not test at all or not experience any symptoms from COVID, they may again just decide at this point, I just want to be safe, so I'm going to exit out of athletic activities for the next 10 days. And that's absolutely fine. And so sometimes those are the cases, like you said, where we may have to cancel sporting events or other, school sanctioned events. And I think that's okay. And that's, again, an extra safety measure in place to make sure that we're not seeing increased spread in those settings.
Dr. Bodie, I wish you could see my face under my mask, because as a parent that had to test 3 children every other day, it seemed, and their test results can show that, it was quite difficult to find tests, and I was not provided with tests. So how are we sharing that information with parents and families so we're not running around the city trying to find these tests?
So I can answer that. I do know that, the tests as they're distributed are distributed out to a host of different school settings, right? So schools have those tests, and they are also distributed again to athletic directors for the purposes of test to play. So there should be adequate testing materials at your school. So we can definitely take a look. I'm unaware of exactly how the communication goes out around who the contact person is in each of those settings, but it's certainly something that we can resend to make sure that families have that information readily available.
Yes, that would be great. Please get those tests out, and then also the new sports guidelines that were sent out to athletic directors today. I think there's some concern around families just not understanding what these new guidelines mean and when these new guidelines go into effect and how they will impact the rest of our seasons that are currently going on. So thank you so much for checking on to that.
And Dr. Pierce, I just want to interject, those building principals just request those from Dr. Klein's office, and they are sent to the buildings.
Okay. They're not, we'll
okay.
get them there. Awesome. And then my last question relates to the quality of workplace. So when I go into buildings and I talk to staff, and even though we have the sanitizers that you can spray, I can tell you, me and one basketball team wiped down all the tables in the library, and it was beyond filthy. I mean, it was the color of this tablecloth, right? And it's not because the custodians aren't doing their job. It's just that we have a lot of students in buildings that are moving, that are doing, surfaces need to be wiped, not always just sprayed, right? And so taking that, we need to put those types of measures in place that are happening in our schools, the real deep cleanings periodically. Taking that, we have teachers that in many instances when their colleagues do call off and we have the sub shortages, are giving up their planning periods. It might be impacting their lunches. How are we thinking creatively about dealing with the staff shortage? I recently read an article where Watermark Bank in Oklahoma City is encouraging his employees to give 2 days to the local school district to help with the sub shortage. I mean, wouldn't it be great if everybody that stood with you at the press conference today and their organizations encouraged their staff to give us 2 days as well to help with the sub shortage? So what are we doing to address that in a creative way beyond this national shortage? We know it's a national shortage. What are we doing?
So what are we doing with, we are recruiting. We're recruiting. We've not talked about addressing additional days for staff members. We're really saying to our staff members, if you are ill, of course, stay home, get tested, vaccinated, etc. But what we have done is we've had staff members to take on other students, and we've been sending some of our central office teams in our classrooms to assist. So when we think about long term, we're thinking about recruiting qualified teachers and subs in our classroom. Short term, we are thinking about who else can assist. Maybe we can have some classes that are doubled and 2 teachers teaching together. but a long-term strategy about what can we do with the current shortage. I'm seeing Mike DeFabo is on. I can give Mike some ideas to share some ideas which HR has in place right now. Mike, thank you.
And I apologize, Dr. Dixon, if if I didn't say it clearly. Watermark Bank is encouraging they're encouraging their employees to give up 2 days to go in and to work in the public school.
Correct.
To help, yes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why I said we have some of our central office staff now who are going in and assisting. They're giving up some of with their jobs, their current jobs and curriculum and across other areas, HR, across the entire enterprise to go in and assist. So that's some of the things we're doing in the short term while we think about the long-term strategy.
I think Dr. Pierce means like community partners.
I know, well, well, I know we have community, well, I'll let Mike kind of talk about what he's doing, but the community partners, I mean, the mayor has stated today if people would step up and come together and volunteer time. But again, we are thinking about that. We have, just at our last board meeting, we had some people from, what was area commissioners?
Far South Side,
So,
Yes.
and we've followed up on that for some after-school programs. So we're working on after-school programs. In the daytime, we've kind of limited amount of people that are going in our buildings because of the virus. But we are really saying to our partners if we want to do some of that after-school activities. That's where we want many of our volunteers, if they would like to come after school. But during the school day, we are really trying to limit additional people coming into our buildings, except for our staff. Because again, you know, we don't have a requirement, a condition of employment to be vaccinated. So we have to make sure that those people and the volunteers that are in our classrooms during the day, we limit, but the ones that want to come afterwards, they follow our guidelines. They're showing their proof of vaccinations to us and really helping us lift those after-school programs. So that's what we're doing now with our volunteers. And we have some of our other agencies that are looking to partner through us with our Power On program that we talked about at our last board meeting, how we can ensure that those 250 hours that we are leveraging for our staff members, if there are partners who want to assist with those teachers and those hours, are there ways that we can galvanize them to come and assist us? So we're having some conversations around what that will look like. But I think more conversation is needed about how these other entities can come in and help us. But I think our HR team has been thinking about some out-of-the-box ideas as well. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dixon. Board member Dr. Pierce, you just said something that I love, and we actually did when I was in DC. So there's two pieces to what you just said that I kind of want to highlight, and there are definitely things that my team is working on right now. The first is that for our career tech programs, there's a real synergy around how you create substitute teachers who are coming directly from the field and volunteering to substitute in specialized classes. So if you have a baking class and you have a chef come, and that chef is really adding to the rigor and the exposure for students based on the curriculum that they're working on. So that's one piece of that, and that's just something that I'd like to get us doing it as a whole. I think the other thing that I found interesting about what you said is thinking about substitutes, volunteers from different businesses. I think it is very interesting we know that we have some large organizations in Columbus City, and I think it would be very interesting to see if we can create a synergy between the volunteer days that a lot of these organizations are already doing, and some of the needs for our school district. My team met this morning with Lee Cole, who is our new executive director for community engagement partnerships. And we're working on a very large district hiring event. And we would be focused on community-based recruitment as it relates to getting to that event, but also engagement across different partners. So to your original idea, it is an idea I love. I think it's definitely something we should be exploring, and we are exploring. I do agree with Dr. Dixon that we sort of have to limit or at least figure out how we balance who is in our schools right now. But I think we can definitely do that with our health experts.
That's awesome. That makes me smile. And then my last question or just comment, when we talk about making sure that we have all the resources in place to ensure that students are getting the necessary hydration throughout the day, the bottled waters that we have had sitting in our buildings in some instances since the hot days of summer, can we check the quality and expiration date on those? I have received encouragement to drink these bottles of water so I can see how much they taste like plastic, and in some instances they do taste like plastic. You know, if you have them sitting there for so long, they start to taste like that plastic, and the shelf life is not good on some of them. And so I just want to make sure that in our strategies, while we want to hydrate students, that those bottles of water just simply aren't sitting there because it's not that our students don't need them, but because their quality is horrible. So they would rather be thirsty all day than to drink plastic.
Agreed. And then board members, I really encourage you, when you're out and about and you're have some questions, please, take a few minutes before you leave and just sit with the principal and just go over with that building principal your observations, and then that building principal would immediately contact whomever it is that they need to do to make that those corrections. So just sit down with them, just say, hey, I'm coming to visit, but here's some concerns that I see, and I want to make sure that we are addressing those, from the water to not sure on how to get supplies. We just want to make sure, and they see you too. Hey, you're here to to further assist and to ask those questions and to get the resources that they need. So I appreciate you bringing these things up, and we'll make sure that we'll communicate to them too, that check those waters, make sure you have the resources. We are a district that have resources we can provide for our staff members and our students, and we want to make sure that we have that environment that people aren't afraid to ask and to get what they need when they need it in their buildings. So thank you for lifting those questions that are coming to you from either staff members or community members, so that we can address those appropriately.
Thank you. I think that going back to the substitute issue, I think we do have to keep thinking outside the box and creative. Some of that, though, is, there's certain requirements for substitutes and things like that. So as we start to think outside the box, and maybe those that are interested in being a sub, they can go get certified and all of that. We do have requirements who can be alone with the students in the classroom, and that's what we need. We need people who have those credentials. So, certainly, plug for subs. Plug for subs. Yeah. I also want to thank the medical professionals that are been on the call and doing this data with us. We haven't changed course through this whole pandemic. We have relied on science. We have relied on these experts, and we don't plan on changing course. So, we're going to make the best decisions in the interest of our students, number one. And, right now we know that it's to be in school. And, I know that Dr. Dixon started with the numbers about how many buildings have been affected. If you do those percentages, we are a very large district. If you look at that, about, I think it was like 63% of our students in buildings have not been impacted. They've been in school the whole time. So, you know, it's important that we kind of keep this in perspective about, you know, the whole district, right? When we talk about issues of equity, you know, and then dig in, like Dr. Pierce was highlighting in this slide that's still up that we can see, you know, region, the Northeast region, like what's going on in these areas that might be leading to some different result. So being able to dig in and use that equity lens to then go and help and find different resources for those schools, classrooms, or communities. So I just want to thank the experts, Dr. Bodie, the Ohio State University, Dr. Roberts, all of you have been, you know, standing with us. Gosh, we're going on year 3. It's like we're best friends now. So, you know, because we've relied on science this whole time. I mean, I am not a medical doctor. I am not an epidemiologist. I can barely say it. You know, this isn't my field of study. And so, you know, I think sometimes we forget that there are people that have studied really hard and long who can advise us. And I know that it's hard when we're all maybe moms, dads, community members, and we get personally impacted by this. But, you know, this is how we are making decisions. And I just want to highlight that again. We have not changed course. It's been science number one, kids number one. Thank you, Dr. Dixon.
Can I ask Dr. Bodie one quick question?
Really quick, because I know Dr.
Yeah.
Bodie wants
She wants to go be with her family. But is it accurate to say that part of all the factors that go into our assessment that it's better for the kids to be in school is the social, emotional, and the mental health aspects of it? In terms of, you know, because we're balancing here.
Yeah, so, you know, first just to say, I mean, we're operating in a pandemic. This is a challenging time for everyone. It's affected every aspect of our society, and so school's been no exception to that. But I think we've learned a lot over the time of the pandemic through data and research about what we can do safely. And we've also learned a lot about what the effects have been on kids throughout this whole pandemic. And I've really felt like, you know, after the initial, when everyone was in lockdown and we were all working together, we had stay-at-home orders, there was this period of resiliency for everyone. And then we all had to kind of move on, and the pandemic continued. And really what we saw, honestly, is that kids were often the silent sufferers. They weren't coming in with mass numbers of hospitalizations. They weren't getting severely ill from COVID, but what they were doing is getting affected by the overall pandemic. This has been stressful. And then when we pivoted to remote learning, as we needed to at the time, we really increased the amount of isolation that many of our students were feeling, and then just disconnection from some of those people that they relied on for their safety net. So those adults that they had relationships with, and they were often cut off for a prolonged period of time. So we've seen an increase in just overall stress and anxiety for students. We've also seen an increase in mental health disorders. So the number of students that are actually suffering from depression and anxiety and needing to come in for evaluations and even medication management. So all of those things have been affected, and we have to take into the account the whole perspective of the child and what we're doing to best support them, because we know they need that social emotional health to be able to be ready to learn. And so it's intimately linked together, and we can't ignore that, and we have to continue to focus on that as well.
Thank you so much. Sorry to ask one last question, but I think it's important. I don't think we need. I mean, I don't know that is there any more questions for Dr. Bodie, but I do want to tie this back to the sub thing.
Can I just add one thing about the unique thing about Watermark Bank is they actually are paying for their staff to get the substitute certification. So I think if we can be creative with that, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That connects back to your sub thing.
But similar to what we're doing with our training drivers or with CDLs.
Yes.
Right, very similar, right, yeah. Similar strategy, different qualifications in different states, but I think to your point, we can work through that and see what would be feasible for Ohio.
And
awesome.
I mean, I don't know, Dr. Bodie, I think you can go to your kids now. I don't know that we need you anymore, but the reason I wanted to get that into our discussion is that it ties back to what the teachers are saying to us, because part of the reason we're staying open is recognizing that this is not optimal time to be teaching. We're doing the best we can on the instruction part, but part of the reason we're keeping our kids in school is so that we can attend to their social emotional needs. And that makes me ask or think of a few things. One is, are we communicating that to the teachers? Do they understand that we understand that at some point when they have 40 kids in the room, that's an exaggeration, I didn't mean that, when they have extra students, and that we can't expect them to be delivering the same level of instruction, performance, and learning that they are when they're not in these, extenuating circumstances, and when it's a different scene every day depending on what staff is out and what staff isn't out, and whether you're going to monitor a larger group in the cafeteria because that's just what you have to do to keep the building running safely that day. That are we, clear that we are in a pandemic and we're doing the best we can, and part of the reason we're staying open is to attend to our social emotional needs of our children, A, because we're a whole child focused, and B, because being whole child focused will allow them to be in a better place to learn once it's over. And so at some point, I just want to make sure that we are communicating that and we're operating from that perspective, and it's not a business as usual with the teachers, so that maybe some of the pressure is off them. I don't know. I mean, we're doing the best we can we're not like not hiring subs because we're sitting on our hands. There aren't any subs to hire. Maybe there's some creative things we can do, but we have to do it now. Like, all of the things we're talking about, I'm afraid, are like 3 months, 6 months down the road, or do we have to ask our partners to be willing? Are there some creative ways to let people help relieve some of the pressures if they're not entirely certified? I don't know what the rules are exactly with that in the building, but I guess it seems to me that we need to own that our purpose here is somewhat broader than business as usual.
No, but I think that we have owned that. I think Dr. Dixon has gone to our community several times over and voiced that to our community. I think in the court of public opinion, the problem is you still have some people who expect it to be business as usual. So you still have those parents that are saying, sure, my kid needs the ACT prep. My kid still needs a class that only has 20 to 15 people in it. Somebody coughed and we need another test. So I think, it has to be an effort on all of our parts. Like President Adair said, nothing has changed. We've kept, the science has been the focus. And in that science conversation, we've always focused on the social emotional needs of our students and making sure that we're there to provide them not just with an education so they can get credentialed, but also with an education so they can be the great human beings that they're destined to be, right? And so I think when we have these conversations, because we focus so much on the data, which I'm a data nerd sometimes, isn't bad. I think it just removes us from having the conversation about social emotional. But if I have not said it before publicly or to our administration, I think you all have done a great job of balancing what needs to be done to keep our students that want to be in school, and to respond to the concerns of families that are concerned about students being in school. But I think that just gives an opportunity for us to step up and think about these truancy laws and the laws that we have in the state of Ohio, and how do we ensure that the state legislature moves in a positive way to not penalize families for keeping if they choose to keep their students at home and keep them protected, right? Dr. Dixon can't stand in the gap and do that. That's our job.
Right. Well, and maybe I misspoke, or I didn't get, I mean, I think we should be firm in that decision and that thinking, and understand that that's what we're doing right now, and that's where we are. And
yeah. And I also want us to make sure, too, when we think about partnerships, think about what's happening this month at COSI, right? So for a whole month, we've designed to our students can go to COSI Saturdays and Sundays, right? When you talk about social emotional well-being and that balance for our students and families, you know, that we thought that was important, so the academic team put that together. Next month, they'll be at the Columbus Museum of Art. So we talk about these passports, these experiences that are in safe places for our students and families on the weekend. I think that goes into this narrative that we want that balance, right? And yes, I hear you, Carol. You know, one, what do schools do? Schools educate students, right? And so, and we are doing that as best as we can during this pandemic, right? But we still have learning targets. We still have students that have to graduate, to get the credentials. And to your point, to both of your points, balancing that while finding additional supports for our students' social emotional well-being. So I think it's a delicate balance. I don't want anyone in the organization to think that they are not appreciated and that they are just babysitting, for lack of another term, a better term. But it is, you know, we are professionals, right? And we are called to do this work. We are called to teach despite the circumstance, and that's why we are open every day. Right. We're open every day because we know the importance of each child learning. We know the importance of each child having a touch base with a trusted adult. And we know that without us coming every day, what happens to our youth? They don't get those opportunities that some may get in the suburbs, right? So I think when we talk about, you know, that higher calling, that's our higher calling. That's why we're having these discussions. That's why we fight every day. That's why we're convening the mayor and other partners to stand up on behalf of the kids that we serve, because we want them in schools. And that's why we have our teachers who are out here on the front line making it happen. It's happening because of our teachers and our nurses and our principals and our bus drivers and our food service. And I need to underscore that. And if I've not said it enough as a leader, I'm saying it now. It is happening because of the work that we're doing. But that's why we're coming to school. We're coming to school because we understand our purpose, our mission, and that's why we're doing this work on the prioritizing through our board goals and guardrails, because you guys have said we're going to make sure we keep reading, right? And if reading is going to be something that we're focused on, that's why we introduce letters, and that's why we're on that video, right? You know, so that stuff is important, and we balance that through people who are tired. I understand people are tired. They're not feeling supported. They don't feel, it's a pandemic.
But we have to address that. I mean, we also had the president. I'm sorry. But I mean, it's all true. It's all 100% true. And it's amazing how much we've managed to keep on doing during all of this. It's, and I don't mean to, but we also have our teachers telling us they are overwhelmed.
They are.
And, you know, it's our job to figure out how to mitigate that. What can we do to take some of the pressure off? How can we?
I think one of the things we did, we took a step last month, remember, in November? And
well,
we had
apparently they're still overwhelmed.
I mean, only thing I can say.
I'm not saying close the schools for 2 weeks. Please understand. I am not
right.
saying that at all. But I think we have, because I think that's where I'm saying stand in our decision and stand in our wisdom, because what we're doing does make sense. And that's all.
Yeah.
Really important.
Yes, it's really important.
But I guess what I'm saying, we have to also listen. And so if, you know, the teachers are saying, I can't teach kids when I have to have them spread out in a gym because I'm covering for another class, we have to also be able to say that's okay at that point.
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, I know this is not something I should be saying from the board table, but maybe you kind of are babysitting for a little while. Or maybe, I know, Tina's going crazy, but I've also been there. When you're happening in the moment, sometimes you're just trying to keep them safe.
Right.
Every moment's a learning moment.
I know,
you can always teach a lesson, and I think, again, to the point is that because we are bound and constrained by state law, there are still learning targets that need to happen, and because our educators are professionals, they're thinking about those learning targets, and I think it's incumbent upon us, everybody in our community, to stand up and tell our State Department of Education, tell the Ohio legislature that we need to change these policies and laws around education because our systems have been greatly impacted by this pandemic. I mean, it amazes me that we're not right now sitting here talking about how can we move the school day and have it start later, because all the evidence has shown that our students do better, older students do better when we start the day later. And we're not having those types of conversations. We're having conversations about social, emotional well-being right now. Like, and one of the
But the
things
team is having a conversation. We just haven't brought the ideas to the board yet.
Oh, look at you. Awesome. But, you know, but Dr. Dixon has said quite often, if we go back to doing education the way we did it before, shame on us. And so I think, you know, we have to continue to fight on some fronts, understanding that we are going to be pushed between the court of public opinion, individuals that want us to do more, individuals that want us to do less. And really, at the end of the day, it's comfort level. Everybody has freedom of choice. If families decide that, hey, you know, I want my child to stay at home to be safe, they're going to keep their child at home to be safe. If our teachers and any type of educator, from custodials to bus drivers, say, I'm going to stay home and take a mental health day, they're going to stay home and take that mental health day. And we just have to think very creatively and innovatively to how we can fill those gaps when they happen. And so I think moving forward with those community partnerships, helping people to obtain those teacher certifications, thinking about how not just in this season during Thanksgiving break we can provide that week-long break, but thinking about how we can implement and institute that, because I know you're interested in doing that at multiple times throughout the year, giving our families advance notice so they're not caught off guard with those breaks, the families that don't want them. But we just have to continue to adjust.
With all due respect, all of those things are true, profoundly true. But we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and we're not going to get the certification process changed in the next 2 weeks. We're not going to get all of these things that we need to address. The school day, the time of the school day is not going to get changed.
I agree.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is
What I'm saying is,
Carol. So this is off. It's an important discussion, but if we want to have this discussion, then we need to budget time for it. I think that both of you have extremely valid points and perspectives, and I think we're just. I mean, you're not disagreeing with each other at all.
No.
There's no disagreement
No
here.
disagreement.
It's just, you know, but if we want to get into, because I mean, you know, I agree with Dr. Pierce about systemic racism, and that, you know, that's driving a lot of this and the way that things have built.
Sure.
I agree with Board Member Beckerly about, you know, the teachers are overwhelmed and they need support today. They you know, what their feelings are valid. I agree with Dr. Dixon. You know, we are doing a lot. We are doing a lot. So we all need to take a breath for a second because it's 8:30.
okay,
I think we're all tired.
fair enough. We're not going to solve
And
it
this
today.
is an important discussion because all these things are super important. But we can't do it all. You said that earlier today.
You're welcome.
And it's about prioritizing.
One thing,
Wait
you're
a
welcome.
second.
Prioritizing.
Yeah.
And then if it's something we want to prioritize, like AJ says, then we put it into a plan and
Okay.
go that way, okay? So I don't want you all to feel shut down, but I'm gonna shut you down a little bit
That's okay.
because I feel like we're going in circles.
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and thank you all for the COVID update, and I hope that the everybody who's gonna watch this, I know this will be something that's talked about in the community, already has from the press conference today. You know, kids number one. So that's what we do, and thank you for all those comments and thoughts. So we're gonna go ahead and move to item 7.2, which is the resolution to adopt Columbus City Schools Board Monitoring Calendar. And ask Board Member Beckerly for the resolution.
Okay, I move that we adopt the resolution to adopt Columbus City Schools Board Monitoring Calendar. Should I read it first?
I think
Did
we
we
ought to
get
get it.
resolution?
Whereas the board has engaged the Council of the Great City Schools to help facilitate their own work around the board's goals and guardrails for the district. And whereas the project has now culminated in a finished product, now therefore be it resolved that the board adopts the Columbus City Schools Board Monitoring Calendar as contained in Exhibit A.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Do we
I
have
move.
discussion?
We have to second to then
Oh,
have
yes.
discussion.
Eric moved.
We have a second. Well, there's been a motion. You second?
Eric.
Fine.
Okay. Is there discussion? Dr. Pierce, seems like you want to have discussion.
I'm just concerned about the timing for our goals related to reading, specifically, and I don't think the calendar needs to be changed
Okay.
around it,
Okay.
but to ensure that we're getting the most up-to-date, accurate data on those reading outcomes, the reading diagnostics that are given to students, grades 1 through 3 and K. Because those diagnostics have to be done before a date in September or something like that. And we get the report,
I think we have our first one.
what, April? We get the report in April or something like that.
Yeah,
Like
I
they're,
think the
they're
first
so
one
far.
we have, February, is gonna be on reading. Okay. I'll make sure.
Yeah.
Dr. Pierce. Okay.
So I just want to make sure that with the data points, we just get the most up-to-date, accurate data for graduation, for those reading guarantees.
Okay.
And the algebra and all those data points.
Any other discussion? Oh, sorry.
Right, so maybe, so we know that, like algebra is not one of the items, but we can,
Well, we put that in as just one of the
It's
ones
the-
that would be in the executive summary.
yeah, in executive summary, yes, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion? Okay, please call the roll.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Ms. Vera,
Yes.
President Adair.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. We're going to move to our consent agenda. Our consent agenda consists of items 9.1 to 23.6. Any member of the board may remove an item for separate vote. Are there any items that would anyone would like to remove for a separate vote? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on any items? Board Member Brown.
Not to a specific item, but this consent agenda, like most of them, includes a large number of items that we are purchasing or that we are contracting for, all kinds of work. And we have in place an LEDE policy, which means that we should be taking steps to do our best for this aspirational goal of having local and economically developed, disadvantaged folks get as many of those contracts that they're qualified for. And it takes more active effort, I think, than we've given it. A couple of years ago, I think, or at least a year ago, we had planned a subcommittee to actually take a hard look at that, and that would have been Dr. Pierce and me and James Ragland, who's no longer serving. But I think we need to re-engage the topic. I think we need to approach this with some seriousness and make this happen. It's important for our community. I'm not sure who all wants to participate, and unlike, I don't have a strong preference. We can do it as a part of the Government and Policy Committee and have a subcommittee there, or it can be a committee of the board, or however you'd like to do it. But you know, this agenda, like many others, just demonstrates that there are opportunities that we can take better advantage of.
Okay, so yes, we can do it. I mean, the committee never went away, so I guess I just need to add another person.
Which is
since
fine.
Board Member Ragland is not here, if we believe that is something we would still like to do. I think that in your comments, though, I don't want the staff that work on this to feel that they were undercut. That's not what your intention.
No,
I
not at
understand.
all.
when you say we need to do a better job, you're talking about board and you're talking about the policy around the LADE.
Correct.
Not the people that are trying very hard to go recruit and fulfill it, because that's not what you mean. I just want to be clear to our staff, that's not what he means. I think part of it is also, you know, again, working with those that are doing this work in the community, and also understanding who's out there and available for these type of positions, and helping them build their capacity. And those vendors that are out there, you know, are sometimes overwhelmed, and I you know, bored, or not overwhelmed. There's just, they don't have capacity, I guess, right? Because they might be a 1 to 2 person business, and they're trying to do subcontracting and just the labor. So no excuses, but we need to look at our policies. That's what you're talking about. Our board policy behind this program.
I am.
So I'm more than happy to appoint another individual if Dr. Pierce wants to continue to serve, or I'm more than happy to put it, your committee, you are leading policy and Dr. Pierce sits on that as well.
Right.
If you'd like it as a subcommittee. So either way is fine with me. We won't do that right now, so because I'm missing 2. So if there's another board member who's interested, we'll make that and then make that announcement at the next.
Sounds good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other items to discuss from the consent agenda? Yes, Dr. Pierce.
18.3. Not that it's a discussion. I just want to thank our administration for taking the opportunity to meet with CSA. To hear their concerns, to bring the legislation back in good faith after having that meeting with them. I know that caught all of us off guard with that, and so thank you for meeting with them and hearing their concerns.
Just 18.3 is resolution authorizing revision to the Columbus Schools Classified Supervisors Association compensation package.
And I hope we can continue a good relationship with them.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other items? All right. Hearing none. Will you please call the roll?
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Dr. Pierce?
Yes.
Ms. Vera?
Yes.
President Adair?
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. All right. I believe Ms. Nichols has left us to join us virtually. There she is. As we have a public commenter, Lakeisha Jefferson, talking about safety metrics in transportation. The action requested: should like the board to revisit some of the transportation policies. Speaker has 3 minutes to speak on this topic.
Hello.
Hello, you have 3 minutes to address the board.
This is Mike. Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, board members, president, and superintendent. My name is Lakeisha Jefferson. I'm a community leader in the 43227. I'm also alumni of the district and an advocate as well. My daughter currently attends St. Mary's, and we utilize transportation department for to and from. While we do appreciate the support with transportation, there's definitely some opportunities I want to kind of put back in front of the board. I had the opportunity to kind of benchmark and start aligning with some of the other districts. I've talked to the director at Beckley, as well as Whitehall and Reynoldsburg. Of course, they're not really up against some of the things that we are up against in the city of Columbus. However, we were able to kind of really start even helping them to start taking more proactive measures and not allowing themselves to be in a more reactive predicament when we come with facing policy. So with all the processes around projects and levies and the resolutions that I've been keeping abreast with the district, and with June being targeted as a critical month for high-level consideration, I just proposed to the board that the analytics and the considerations around the transportation policy also be a high-level priority. A few things that come to mind, aside from safety, is just the communication. The notification system is definitely a system that's broken and needs to be fixed. We have 389 projects that are running, that's open, some are far-reaching, but the things we can get in front of, we're not trying to get in front of it. We're allowing for things to be swept under processes However, there's opportunities that we do have in front of us to get in front of, and I just ask the board to reconsider these things and put it in a high priority level. One thing that comes to mind with safety is that I learned, because I get notifications 43209, 43227, 43232, with the safety predator notifications. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I want to be not only as a parent, but a leader in the community to also inform the organization, the Mid-Area East organization. I work with Commissioner Barnes and as well as Lynn LaCour, and just making sure that the community, we all wrap ourselves around the safety of the kids. So one of the things I learned with the transportation is that kids can be dropped off 2 doors down from a sexual predator. They just can't be dropped off directly in front of or across the street, but they can be dropped 2 doors down. And we need to look at the logistics. That was another thing, logistics, communication, and safety. While I do understand that this could be something that can be considered far-reaching, but we can leverage Columbus State, some of these students at Ohio State. We're currently going to be working with Ohio State to understand some of the trends of crime and analytics in our neighborhoods in the 43227 and the 43222. There are partnerships that the school can leverage as far as understanding how we can support this.
Ms. Jefferson, your time is expired. We do very much appreciate you sharing your comments about these really important issues. Since you didn't get a chance to finish, if you would like to submit the rest of that in writing, you can do that, and that will be we'll get that to the appropriate people. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. There is no executive session, and so the last thing that we need is a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Ms. Vera,
Yes.
President Adair,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. We're adjourned.
Very good.